morning, everybody. It's a real pleasure and honor to me to join these very distinguished panelists. I am acting now as the chairman of the Real Instituto Elcano, and I want to thank you very especially to the Ambassador Hiramatsu and the cooperation of the Japanese embassy. It's a real pleasure for the Real Instituto Elcano to be able to host or co-host this meeting. This is the 4th year we are having this kind of panels, and for us it's really a very timed moment to try to face the challenges that we are facing now in the world economic order. All of you know that multilateralism and international norms has been under very heavy pressure in the last few years for multiple reasons, including United States and China, and this has paved the way for an international order increasingly framed by power politics and bipolarization that undermines key interests and values of the European Union and Japan. I think for these, it's a very well sweet moment to try to raise our hands and to say that Japan and the European Union need to cooperate more than ever to reinvigorate a rule-based multilateral order. This is especially the case in the Indo-Pacific area, a focal point of great powers competition where both the European Union and Japan, two international actors highly dependent on external trade, but with limited hard power, share the same interests for free and open maritime trade, peace, and stability. I think that the opportunities for cooperation and synergy are very clear between the Japanese and the current European approach on the Indo-Pacific. Some of the common points presented in these strategies has been materialized already in some European Union-Japan agreements, such as the European Union-Japan Partnership on Sustainable Connectivity and Quality Infrastructure, was signed in September 2019. Nevertheless, geostrategic cooperation may appear particularly challenging, as it is not a traditional area of cooperation between the European Union, its member states, and Japan. For these, taking into account this need to reinvigorate our cooperation, what we want to achieve with these panels is to promote geostrategic collaboration between Europe and Japan, two of the main advocates of a multilateral and rule-based international order. To stimulate the debate inside the European Union on the elaboration of a strategy towards the Indo-Pacific, I think it's a key point. You can be extremely helpful for us to promote and to foster this cooperation, and the development of a unified and coherent Indo-Pacific strategy inside the European Union will increase its influence on the region, a central economic and geostrategic theater of our time, but traditionally neglected by many European stakeholders. We need your help. That's the reason that we so happy to have these panels and to promote a very free trade of ideas, values, because we share the same values and the same strategic interests. Thank you again for being with us. It's really a pleasure to host these meetings, and I looking forward to hear your point of view, and above all, to try to cooperate more in a more coherent way, in a more stronger way, because both of us need this cooperation. Thank you very much. On behalf of the Real Instituto Elcano, welcome to this panel. Who is going to take the floor now? Ambassador?
Yes, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, good evening for Japanese friend. First of all, I'd like to express my gratitude to the Elcano Royal Institute and Mr. Jose Juan Ruiz, Chairman of the Institute, to organize this online symposium, the Indo-Pacific, a privileged space for enhancing EU-Japan geostrategic cooperation. Although the term Indo-Pacific has been enjoying growing acknowledgement in recent years, but as far as I am aware, a symposium on the Indo-Pacific has rarely been held in Spain until today. I had a good discussion on the Indo-Pacific with the former chairman, Mr. Ramos Espinosa, and his team last year, and the idea of holding the symposium came out from that discussion. I'm pleased that this idea has become reality today. I'm convinced that the presence of carefully selected excellent experts will contribute to today's extremely meaningful discussions about cooperation between Japan and the EU in the Indo-Pacific region and the possibility of building an Indo-Pacific strategy for the EU. Today, I'm delighted to have among us some of the top experts in this field from Japan. Professor Izumi Ono from the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies, Professor Yuichi Hosoya, and Professor Ken Jimbo, both from Keio University. They are the most highly regarded researchers, and I enjoyed a good friendship with them since a long time ago. I'd like to thank them for their participation today, despite their very busy schedule. Thank you very much. I should avoid a lengthy introduction, but please allow me to touch upon briefly the policy of the Japanese government on this important topic. The Indo-Pacific region is the engine of growth in the world economy and represents half of the world population. The concept of a free and open Indo-Pacific FOIP is the initiative of Japan and based on a combination of three pillars. First, the promotion of the fundamental principles such as democracy and rule of law. Second, the pursuit of economic prosperity through connectivity. And third, the commitment to peace and stability, including maritime security. We believe that this concept has a strategic value to shape a world where the rule of law prevails. This is open to all countries who share the fundamental principle and vision of FOIP. The number of countries which support FOIP is increasing, not only in Indo-Pacific region, but also in Europe, Africa, and Latin America. We are pleased to see the growing cooperation among Japan, India, Australia, and the United States to realize FOIP. The Suga administration will redouble its effort to promote this idea worldwide. In the joint statement on strategic partnership between Japan and Spain, published on the occasion of the former Prime Minister Abe's visit to Spain in 2018, the two leaders reaffirmed that free and open maritime order based on international law is an important pillar of stability and prosperity of the international community. They confirmed that it is of mutual benefit to work together to maintain and promote a free and open maritime order in the Indo-Pacific region. This commitment, which was confirmed at the highest level in both countries, is exactly in line with the idea of a free and open Indo-Pacific FOIP. Therefore, we hope to see a growing interest in Spain, which will lead to the more active role of Spanish government in its implementation. Historically speaking, Spain has been a worldwide maritime nation. The name of Elcano Royal Institute demonstrates so. Hence, it is not a coincidence that this institute has organized today's seminar. I'm convinced that promotion of a free and open Indo-Pacific FOIP, which advocates freedom of navigation, is of great importance to Spain. In closing, I'd like to convey my gratitude again to Elcano Royal Institute and all the participants of this symposium. I sincerely wish that this symposium shall become an opportunity to enliven the discussion on the free and open Indo-Pacific FOIP in Spain. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Thank you very much for everybody.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador. Mario, ¿cómo seguimos?
Pues, see, if it's fine for you, I can introduce now the first session.
Okay.
Okay, so I will do so. My name is Mario Esteban, and I'm the senior analyst for the Asia-Pacific region at the Elcano Royal Institute, and I will be chairing the first session on the shared interest between the European Union and Japan on the Indo-Pacific region. Ambassador Hiramatsu and the chairman of Elcano Royal Institute, Jose Juan Ruiz, they already introduced the topic of the first session, and of course I don't want to trample into the presentations of our speakers, so I will be very brief, in my introduction. The goal of this session is to present a sober, practical, and realistic assessment of the common ground and the challenges for further cooperation between Japan and the EU in Indo-Pacific region from different perspectives, socioeconomic, security, business. So in order to do so, I mean, we have gathered a panel of very well-known European and Japanese experts and practitioners from different areas of expertise, so they can focus on different topics. Before introducing, our first speaker, I would like to let you all know that we would like to encourage you to submit your questions to our panel, and in order to do so, you are welcome to send those questions to the following email address: events@rielcano.org. events@rielcano.org. So please do so if you like to engage with our panelists. This session will be organized in this way. First, our four speakers, they will introduce the topics. They will make presentations for, let's say, roughly 8 minutes, every one of them. And then I will raise some questions to them to kick off the debate. And then, as I said before, we will love you to send us your questions so we can have a lively and engaging debate. So without further ado, I would like to introduce our first speaker today. He is Mr. Giuseppe Piquet. He has held, so many positions in the Spanish public administration. He was Minister of Industry and Energy, Minister of Foreign Affairs, Minister of Science and Technology. He has been also government spokesman, deputy and senator of the Spanish Parliament. Among all those positions, I would like to highlight just one point for the members of the audience who didn't know, and is that it was during his tenure as Minister of Foreign Affairs of Spain, it was from year 2000 to 2002, that the Spanish Ministry of Foreign Affairs issued his first outlook to the Asia-Pacific region. So he has been always very focused, very engaged, very interested in the development of that region and very aware of the relevance for that region to Europe and Spain. He has also held many senior positions in the private sector, and he actually still does so in different companies. I would also like to underline one point there, and it's that he also holds the presidency, he's the chairman of the Spanish-Japanese Forum and Foundation, which is a public-private, institution. So, I think that it's quite obvious that in Spain, there's not many people who has a more authorized voice, to speak on this topic. And now, Mr. Piquet, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, Mr. Esteban. For me, it's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you the Real Instituto Elcano for its kind invitation to participate in this very, very interesting debate. Thank you very much for your presentation as well. It's a problem of age. So I have had the possibility to have a lot of things, not always well, but in any case, thank you very much for that. Let me to express also my consideration to Ambassador Hiramatsu. We are cooperating a lot Japan Foundation and in the forum. We wait for to celebrate the forum in Kyoto at the end of this year. Last year it was impossible for the pandemic, as everybody knows, but I think that at the end of the year we can recover the forum and continue with a very, very good bilateral relationship between the two countries, Spain and Japan. Going directly to the issue. Let me say one thing that I think is important. The Indo-Pacific is a new concept. You have mentioned the Plan Asia Pacifico that we started when I was foreign minister 20 years ago. The concept was Asia Pacific. Now the main concept is Indo-Pacific. This is a concept introduced precisely, as Ambassador Hiramatsu reminded us before, was introduced by Japan. The Ambassador Hiramatsu has been one of the most prominent promoters when he was ambassador in India. But it's true, almost immediately, this concept was adopted by United States. A little bit later on, was adopted as well by India, and in the recent years, I think that it was in 2017, it was adopted also by the Asian countries in the Southeast Asia. So, as well, and besides, as well, it is the geopolitical framework for Australia and New Zealand. This concept, as I said before, has substituted the concept of Asia Pacific for different reasons. The most important one is, paradoxically, the result of the behavior of one of the opponents of the idea. I'm talking about China. Let me remember that the Chinese foreign minister has rejected the idea of Indo-Pacific region, saying that this concept will dissipate like ocean foam. Well, ironies of the history. The growing, assertive, and more aggressive Chinese foreign policy has provoked a change of the views of the different actors. For the United States, is the bid to contain China expansionism because they need allies like India in order to be successful in this objective, to contain China. For India, is essential for its greatness. For Indonesia, is an opportunity to have a leverage for the future as one of the most important economies in the world. Possibly in one decade, the economy of Indonesia could be more or less like the Japanese economy. So we are talking about a very important country. For Australia, is the adequate framework for establishing alliances. And finally, for Japan, is vital for regaining influence and security, including for Europe. We'll talk a little bit later on, immediately. It could be the way to be present in the, in inverted commas, the Asian century. Let me point out one thing. China needs to neutralize any alliance against her, to neutralize any alliance against her if they want to reach her objectives. China needs to neutralize this, and this is an important point. But for the rest, even USA, the bar is another one to avoid it. In other words, they will prevail if they succeed in resisting. That's why for USA, it's vital to remain in the region and promoting alliances and supporting the other countries. It's essential to preserve its global credibility, more than its presence in the Middle East, of including its presence in Europe and in the Atlantic. But we have to consider specifically the role of Japan. This is a dialogue between the European Union and Japan. China is actually the main concern. Despite a remarkable economic relationship between the two countries, China and Japan, beyond the rivalry in terms of economic weight, China is a great challenge for the military point of view, and more significantly in the technological field. Japan has two main concerns, in my opinion. One, to avoid the hegemony of China in Asia as a whole, in the Pacific and in the Indian Ocean, and to avoid any potential, in inverted commas, strangulation of its lines of supply, especially oil and gas, energy, and also food. More precisely, the Japanese Indo-Pacific strategy, so-called free and open Indo-Pacific, seeks to expand Japan's presence in the region in order to explicitly gain energy security and also food security, in order to tacitly and implicitly constrain China. That means to have partners beyond the USA and reshifting investments from China to the Asian countries, and more important, to invest in infrastructures competing with the Belt and Road Chinese strategy, and building up alliances with the different countries in the region, bilaterally or multilaterally, but always recognizing that for Japan, USA is the unavoidable partner, and they need USA absolutely engaged in the region. So, I'm concluding. We are talking about a strategy based on the defense of a real multilateralism, not the multilateralism defended by the Chinese, preserving free maritime roads on the common basis, international order based on rules, but also values as democracy, human rights, market economies, open societies, and so on. And this is the framework. This is the framework for a cooperation with the European Union. We share the same values and global interests. We, Europeans, we have to be more proactive in our presence in the region, the center of the gravity of the planet, without any doubt, exploring different approaches, but we have a good common framework. The agreements between Japan and the European Union. We have to develop them very deeply. And we have also the same main ally, United States. We have to intensify political dialogue and to be solidary with the other countries like Japan, which share the same vision of the world based on, as I said before, values like democracy or market economy or open societies. And it's not the same, we know very well that. This is not the same vision that the vision of China. That's why I think we have a very large field to work together between the European Union, Japan, and in general terms with this incipient, this new concept that can go to a, in inverted commas, an Indo-Pacific alliance, including the military issues. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Piquet, for this very comprehensive presentation. And now I would like to introduce our second speaker, Céline Pajon, from the French Institute of International Relations, and she is the head of the Japan Research Center, at that institute. I would like just to say very briefly, before following with her CV, that Elcano Royal Institute and IFRI, we have a very intense, cooperation in the on these topics, and actually, I'm very happy that finally, we are able to have Celine here, because before we have had also some of her colleagues, and this is, I think, the first time that we have Celine, but I'm sure that it won't be the last. So I was saying, that she is the head of the Japan Research at the Center for Asian Studies at IFRI, and she has been research fellow there since 2018. She has also joined much more recently. I think it was like late last year. I remember the month of late last year. The Japan program at the Free University of Brussels. She has been also an international research fellow with the Canon Institute for Global Studies in Tokyo, and was a visiting fellow at the Japan Institute for International Affairs, of course, also in Tokyo. Her area of expertise is Japan's foreign and defense policy, as well as the geostrategic dynamics of the Indo-Pacific area. She was a graduate from the Institute of International and Development Studies in Geneva and Sciences Po Lyon. And Celine, she also studied in Waseda University in Tokyo and Osaka University. And now, Celine, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Mario, for the very kind introduction. You're too kind, actually. And thanks a lot to you for the invitation for this discussion this morning. Thanks a lot for the Institut Elcano for having me. I'm very pleased to be here along with such bright experts and officials. So I would like in my presentation to start by saying that I very much concur with what Mr. Piquet said about the common values, principles and objectives that bind the EU and Japan together, more generally on the global stage and precisely, of course, in the Indo-Pacific. I am very much convinced that the EU-Japan partnership is already a common good in itself and should expand and deepen in this region. But because precisely I am an advocate of this partnership, and I believe that it has an important role to play in the Indo-Pacific, I would like in my presentation today to recall also the differing priorities in Japan and EU's approaches in the region. And I'm doing that also because Mario asked me to do this and for the sake of discussion also. So it's very much a way also to launch the discussion with our Japanese friends here. I believe it is important to recognize the differences to prevent any misunderstanding. Because expectation gap and over expectation, as you know, are detrimental, as it can create stumbling blocks and impediment actual cooperation. And the lack of concrete achievement can in turn weaken the credibility of the commitment and of the partnership. So I think it is important to talk about it also. And to address this, I will also at the end of my presentation suggest some priority areas for cooperation to make progress in an efficient manner. And so while the EU and Japan's objective in the Indo-Pacific are quite similar, I think it would be very difficult to say the contrary. Well, their priorities are not the same. As it was also highlighted, they are not located in the same part of the world, and thus it's quite natural that their threat perception is a bit different. Also, they have not the same kind of relations with both China and the US, and this can cause uneasiness. And in particular, I believe, but of course, I'm open to the reaction of the Japanese speaker here. I believe Japan maybe is having some concerns about the EU's attempt to assess its strategic autonomies. I think maybe Tokyo might worry that the Sinatra doctrine put forward by Joseph Borrell might end up in a worst-case scenario to an EU equidistant posture between China and the US. The preliminary signature of the Comprehensive Agreement of Investment, the CAI, with China also sparked controversy, and it contradicted the Japanese expectation of the EU becoming more strategic or less naive vis-à-vis China. And the CAI, as you know, is not a done deal yet. So we still have to look at the future negotiation, discussion, and months forward. But the CAI created also tension with the Biden administration. And so Tokyo is concerned that EU's drive for strategic autonomy would be an impediment, maybe to shape a coalition of like-minded partners in the Indo-Pacific region. Conversely, the Europeans sometimes can have the feeling that Japan's priority is to accommodate its US allies, and sometimes at the detriment of the bilateral coordination on promoting an ambitious global agenda. And here I'm thinking about some issues like trade and climate change in the G7 and G20 summit, for example. And this was the case especially under the Trump administration, of course, because at that time the EU and the US interests very much diverged on these topics precisely. And of course, this kind of tension will be eased up under Biden. But for Japan, as Mr. Piquet said, it is sure that be sure that not antagonize the US allies will be a vital priorities now and in the years to come. So while Japan's other priority is to check and balance China, it is also actively encouraging Europe to adopt a tougher position vis-à-vis Beijing and upgrade its commitment in the Indo-Pacific. And actually, Europe is not, as you know, located in Asia. And while it is very aware right now that its interests are directly impacted by what is happening in the Indo-Pacific region, while its strategic priorities and urgencies are located in its immediate neighborhood, in direct neighborhood. And I think it is realistic also to say that it would be quite challenging for the 27 member states to achieve maybe a strong consensus on the relation with China. And also, I guess also realistic to say that the resources, EU resources to be devoted to the Indo-Pacific may remain limited. So respective priorities, capacities, and expectations should be assessed in a sobering way by holding a continuous dialogue between the EU and Japan, just as we are doing this morning. That's why this kind of discussion is so useful. And as you know, I'm really now playing the devil's advocate. But I strongly believe that Japan and the EU need each other in the Indo-Pacific and in the context of the Sino-US competition. Europe will be ready to join the effort in the Indo-Pacific, but I believe with some caution and while retaining a degree of strategic autonomy. It will commit because it is in its own interest, of course, to keep the stability in the region, to keep the lane of communication secure, but also because of the US pressure, I think, on the Europeans to be present more in the region. And because also they need to keep the US engaged in Europe neighborhood as well for their own security. And to maintain their autonomy, Europeans will put their effort on nurturing multilateral initiative and work with its partners in the region. And I believe Japan is maybe the first of them. On its part, Japan wants to facilitate the commitment, I believe, of both the EU and the US in the Indo-Pacific. It will expect both to keep a tough line on China, for the US on the military matters, and for the EU maybe on human rights, norms and values. because it is also difficult for Japan sometimes to appear as too confrontational vis-à-vis its powerful neighbor. And Tokyo will make efforts to ensure a minimum consensus to allow for coalition of democracies whenever possible, I think. So how to harvest the low-hanging fruits and to advance the bilateral cooperation in the most efficient way. I think that to ensure a steady development in cooperation, we should not go a bridge too far. And rather, Japan and the EU should focus on areas in which they have a comparative advantage, a special interest, and the previous experience on which they can easily build. Three obvious areas in my mind are maritime security, connectivity schemes, and the promotion of the rule of law. As for maritime security, I think there's plenty of ways to find synergies. Maybe especially in a way try to coordinate efforts to support maritime capacity building in the third countries in the region. Both the EU and Japan have an extensive experience in this, and they probably can meet more easily in the Western Indian Ocean, which is an important strategic area for both of them. In terms of connectivity, Japan and the EU can build on their connectivity partnership, as well as on synergies and complementarities between the many activities they are already doing in this field in the region. In addition, Japan is part of many connectivity initiatives, also led by the US and also with other partners such as the Blue Dot Network and so on. And I think Japan would be certainly interested to try to publicize this initiative to the Europeans also and try to encourage them, maybe to try to facilitate their participation in this kind of scheme. And finally, Japan and the EU will have an important role to play in the digital connectivity field, which is a new area for rulemaking. As you know, the EU is already a global leader on this particular area, and Japan has made a strong, very important effort to try to bridge the EU and US approaches in terms of data privacy by articulating the concept of data free flow with trust, which is advanced in the G20 summit back in Osaka in 2019. A third area of cooperation is the rule of law, upholding the rule of law, especially the law of the sea, and ensuring that freedom of navigation is respected, not violated in the region. This year, we will have a number of naval dispatch, naval deployment from Europe to the Indo-Pacific and all the way to Japan. So I think this is very good opportunities for the partners to reach out to each other, to multiply interaction and to send strong political signals. But we are also witnessing a kind of battle of not verbal in the UN. Regarding the situation in the South China Sea, and also it's a very key area, I believe, for both the EU and Japan to come together and to fight those lawfare activities. Finally, I think it will be important to encourage a trilateral cooperation or coordination with the US, which is an important partner for both the EU and Japan. And so for me, the priority will be to build up the credibility of the EU-Japan coordination in the Indo-Pacific through concrete progress and also strategic communication. And I'm already too long, and I will stop here and looking forward for the question and discussion. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Celine. And now we will have the perspective from Japan. Our next speaker, she is Professor Izumi Ono, and she is a professor at GRIPS, the National Graduate Institute for Policy Studies in Tokyo. She specializes in international development policy, development cooperation, business and development. She was director of the Japan International Cooperation Agency Ogata Sadako Research Institute for Peace and Development. And she continues to serve as senior research advisor there. Prior to joining the GRIPS, she worked at the Japanese International Cooperation Agency, the World Bank, and the Japan Bank for International Cooperation. And I would like to mention that when she was working at the World Bank, she visited many Latin American countries. She actually speaks very good Spanish. I have to confess.
Great.
I didn't know before. No, more than un poquito, more than a little. I mean, I mean, we were speaking before in Spanish, and I was quite surprised about how fluent she is. She graduated from the Suda College in Tokyo. She holds a Master Public Administration from the Princeton School of Public and International Affairs. And during the Think 20, you know, there's this network of think tanks. You know, is attached to the G20, to the G20, sorry. She served as lead and co-chair of the task force on the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, I mean, during the Japanese presidency of the G20. And she contributed to formulating policy recommendations for the G20 at the Osaka Summit. And she also has been engaged in a number of advisory committees in the areas of international development, such as a member of the advisory panel to the Minister of Foreign Affairs of the Official Development Aid Charter Review, chair of the advisory committee for the Japan Inclusive Business Support Center of the Ministry of Trade and Industry. So I think it's quite obvious that she is more than qualified, I mean, to speak about all this shared interest and cooperation between the EU and Japan on the business perspective and socioeconomic development perspective. Professor Ono, you have the floor now.
Okay, thank you, Mario. Yeah, thank you very much for the really very nice introduction to me. So let me share my screen first. Okay. Okay. Could you see the screen? Okay.
Yes, yes.
Yeah, so buenos dias and good evening and konbanwa for everybody. So me llamo Izumi Ono, but it's my great pleasure to participate in this webinar. As Mario kindly introduced, I specialize in international development and also business in development. So I'd like to talk about EU-Japan partnership in light of building sustainable, inclusive, and resilient supply chains in the Indo-Pacific region. Okay. For EU and Japan partnership, I believe this year, 2021, is a very important year for moving toward concrete actions. As everybody said, that 2019 marked a historic milestone in advancing EU-Japan partnership framework. I'm not going to mention in all of them. And then last year was a bit challenging year for everybody in the world. We got to cope with the COVID pandemic. But I think there's some steady progress, such as like RCEP was accorded, and EU-ASEAN strategic partnership was there. And also I think EU-China investment agreement, I mean, we hope that will move a very constructive that way forward. So this year in 2021, we continue to face the pandemic challenges and various risks, but I believe EU and Japan should make it a year for concrete actions toward building back better BBB in the recovery process. Particularly, I think Ambassador Hiramatsu and Ambassador Pique mentioned this Indo-Pacific is a critical test case for EU and Japan to promote shared fundamental values such as quality, human-centered approach, green, as embodied in the SDG and the Paris Agreement. And particularly, I think FOIP is becoming a very much common platform, including France, Germany, Netherlands, and also latest US Biden administration also talk about in the interim national security strategy guidance. It says that the US presence will be most robust in this Indo-Pacific region and also Europe. And ASEAN also that issued outlook on the Indo-Pacific, stressing at the centrality and inclusiveness. So in this regard, how can we move forward? I think Selina kindly introduced a very much priority the aspect, and I really agree with that. at the same time, I think you have to find out a kind of pragmatic entry point. And I think maybe economic prosperity pillar can be a good way to start in promoting shared value in the Indo-Pacific region. As ambassadors mentioned that among the three, the pillar of FOIP, rule of law, economic prosperity, and peace and stabilities. And I think that this region is a very much most populous and economically dynamic region. And I think I mean not only physical connectivity, but also trade, investment, human resource, maybe digital, those soft side are also very important. Of course, US-China rivalry is likely to continue under the current US administration, but I believe engagement is inevitable in today's world of economic interdependence. And I feel like I think we have to really solve these various global challenges like a pandemic or climate issues or maybe debt issues in developing countries. And I think for those global solutions, we have to work globally together. Global partnership cooperation is very much important. And particularly in the post-COVID era, building sustainable, inclusive, and resilient supply chain is even more essential for various reasons. I think everybody understands that China is a major driver of economic recovery in the post-pandemic era. And also we have seen over the past decade, there's lots of deepening economic interdependence among EU, Japan, China, and including Indo-Pacific, the country in this region. And also for developing economy in this region, achieving shared prosperity, avoiding middle income trap is very much important. And I think it seems China is more willing to contribute to the global public goods and SDG stressed in the latest white paper on international development cooperation. Let me share with you several slides, picture about data and figures. This shows composition of the world GDP among major regions. And you see that there are major change between 1990 and now. Japan used to be a second of the GDP after US, but I think 2010, I think China took over it. And I think more change will come between now and 2016, particularly India, China, we account for 35% of global GDP in 2016, according to the estimate of Japanese research think tank. As a result, combined shares of US and European countries will maybe decrease from currently over 50% to 38%. So this is going to be almost equal, not share between them. And also ASEAN and the Asian new emerging economy will have a very much important projection for the growth. So this Indo-Pacific is a very much really important the dynamic driver of the economic development. And this figure shows the evolution of production network in all goods and services and also ICT goods. And as you see, between 2000 and 2017, with the China becoming a membership of the WTO, it has become a really successfully the factory of the world. And then particularly EU, European country and China's, those kind of network, production network has been so much expanded and closely integrated. So this is a kind of, I mean, we are really integrated. This slide shows that maybe post-recovery, the projection, and we hope world will recover this year, 5.5%, according to the IMF latest information. And then at the same time, I think major the source of the growth recovery is coming from emerging market and developing economies, including China and also India from that maybe that the jump, no, together with that, yeah. And for that, I think it's really important that these emerging market and developing economy also make the sustained and building back better recoveries, and also to avoid middle income trap. To that end, it is very much important, not only labor intensive manufacturing, but also to make sure the value added creation in that the value chain would be very important, which include productivity and quality enhancement, as well as maybe social compliance enhancement issues. So those are very much prerequisite. And I think we hope we can achieve together through maybe EU and Japan cooperation, through investment, and also development cooperation in sustainable recovery in the region. So this is for maybe toward building sustainable and inclusive resilience in the global supply chain. In the globally connected world, I think every step of the value chain in raw materials, supplies, procurement, logistics, production, distribution, I think we hope to achieve sustainability and inclusiveness in accordance with objective of achieving sustainable development goal, including that the human rights issues of workers, climate issues, and the clean water, etc. So these are very much important in terms of the investment and trade, and hope development cooperation can also support. So lastly, in conclusion, let me say the world now has a high aspiration for shared prosperity, particularly in post-pandemic era. So it is very important that the recovery process be guided by Building Back Better, BBB principle. In light of diversity and economic dynamism in the Indo-Pacific, let me repeat, this building sustainable, inclusive, resilient supply chain is a pragmatic way to realize such aspiration. And I hope this should also contribute to the other pillars, such as rule of the law, peace and stability, security issues. But to this end, we need comprehensive approach encompassing trade, investment, infrastructure, PPP, and development cooperation. So let me conclude by saying that this year is the really year for EU and Japan to move forward in concretized actions, building the normative framework already established so far. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Muchas gracias.
Muchas gracias, Professor Ono. You made a very enlightening presentation. And now we move to the security topics. We move to the security dimension with Professor Yuichi Hosoya. Dr. Hosoya, he is Professor of International Politics at Keio University in Tokyo, and he's also the Managing Director and Research Director, at the Asia-Pacific East Initiative in Tokyo. He is also Senior Researcher at the Nakasone Pins Institute, Senior Fellow at the Tokyo Foundation for Policy Research, and also Senior Adjunct Fellow at the Japan Institute of International Affairs. And even if his CV doesn't say so, I can say that he's one of the most well-known Japanese experts on defense and security. Professor Hosoya, he was a member of the Prime Minister's Advisory Panel on Reconstruction of the Legal Basis for Security, and on the Prime Minister's Advisory Panel on National Security and Defense Capabilities. He studied international politics at Rikyo, Birmingham, and Keio universities, and actually his PhD, he got his PhD at Keio University. He was a visiting professor and Japan chair at Sciences Po in Paris, and a visiting fellow at Princeton University with a Fulbright scholarship. His research interests include the post-war international history, British diplomacy history, Japanese foreign and security policy, and contemporary East Asian international politics. He has published, many monographies and academic papers, in very well-renowned scholarly publications. So I don't want to make that list because it will be very long, but I will encourage you, to check on the internet about his publications. So Professor, you have the floor now.
Well, thank you very much, Mario, for your very kind introduction. And also, let me thank the organizer of this conference, as well as Ambassador Hiramatsu, for having such a wonderful seminar at a very important timing. I really like to focus on the importance of the timing, because I would expect that 2021 will become the turning point in world history, kind of a battle between liberal democracy and authoritarian regimes. And we don't know which one will win in the coming years, but as long as both Japan and the EU or European countries works hard to try to attract the world with the ideology of liberal democracy or capitalism and so on, maybe we can win the battle. But anyway, I think that the timing is really important to think about the current important turning point. And let me focus on the importance of Indo-Pacific in my talk. But in the beginning, I also like to talk about two important dichotomies when I talk about regional order in the Indo-Pacific. We can think about two important dichotomies in the Indo-Pacific region when we think about it. One dichotomy is between an inclusive and open regional order and much more closed or exclusive Asian regional order. I would say that Japan has been advocating an inclusive and open regional order in the last several decades in this region. Let me give you one example. In the early 1990s, when Prime Minister Mahathir of Malaysia proposed a regional vision of EAEC, East Asian Economic Caucus, excluding the United States and Europe, Japan didn't join in and agree with the idea because Japan really at the time didn't like to exclude any countries, and not just the United States, but at the same time, Japan was working very hard at that time to try to invite and bring China into international community. Japan was a leading country which actually invited China into the WTO, against many criticisms upon Japanese attitude towards China, because that was exactly just a few years after the Tiananmen Square incident of 1989. Many Western countries actually criticized China on its behaviors on the human rights. So you can easily understand that Japan has been in the last 3 decades always against the idea of excluding any country. On the other hand, some countries in the region, such as Malaysia and China, favored more exclusive Asian regional order in a civilizational term. They tried to exclude non-Asian countries, such as the United States, European countries, Australia, and New Zealand. They don't think these countries are Asian because these countries are often seen as a kind of a white countries. So they have sometimes quite racial point of view when they talk about Asia. So that's why Japan has been always against such kind of an exclusive vision of regional order often proposed by Chinese government. Let me give you one example. President Xi Jinping in May 2014 tried to exclude external powers from Asian security order at the CICA summit. CICA is the Conference on Interaction and Confidence Building Measures in Asia. And in that summit meeting, President Xi proposed Asian security by the Asians. Of course, Europeans, Americans, Australians cannot be within the regional order. So Japan was, of course, against the idea. Japan is not the member of that forum, CICA, but anyway, Japan has been always criticizing such kind of exclusive vision. That's why Japan naturally welcomed a more European, deeper engagement in the Indo-Pacific. And let me give you once again the another important dichotomy. The other dichotomy is a kind of a battle between liberal democracies and authoritarian regimes. During the COVID-19 crisis, of course, authoritarian regimes are becoming more powerful, and European countries and the United States are two most heavily affected regions in the world by the COVID-19. Because of the COVID-19, both the United States and European countries are suffering hugely from the difficulties of lockdown, difficulties of trying to overcome these economic difficulties. So anyway, I just like to focus on the importance of the turning point of this year, because we are in a turning point in a battle between liberal democracies and authoritarian regimes. During the President Trump administration, President Trump did not focus on the importance of ideology, because he was often attracted by very strong leaders in authoritarian regimes. On the other hand, he often criticizes liberal democratic regimes. That's why President Trump didn't value heavily on the importance of creating a stronger cooperation with European countries. On the contrary to that, President Biden has been heavily focusing on the importance of cooperation among liberal democracies while criticizing human wrongs in China or authoritarian regimes, suppressing liberty in some countries. So that's why I think that now Japan and Europe has to realize the importance of value under the President Biden administration when we think about foreign policy. And then let me move on to the importance of Japan's strategy of FOIP and also European global strategy. Both of the strategic papers are written in 2016, but before that, in 2013, Japanese government for the first time published its national security strategy paper, and I was within the advisory panel to draft it. And also Ambassador Hiramatsu was representing Ministry of Foreign Affairs as Director General for Foreign Policy Bureau to create that document. And I strongly insisted on the importance of Japan's cooperation with European countries, because I was also thinking about the importance of rule-based international order and also the importance of the value of liberal democracy. That's why we cannot dismiss the importance of Japan's cooperation with European countries, even though Japan's trade with European countries are limited. And also Japan's biggest trading partner is and has been China for many years. Even though China is Japan's most important economic partner and a trade partner, but at the same time, we have to look at the importance of value. That's why I strongly advocated the importance of value or importance of cooperation with like-minded countries. And then European Union also began to realize the importance of cooperation with Japan and India. Previously, I feel that the European Union had heavily relied on its cooperation with China in Asia. Of course, for the EU, China was the most important trading partner. That's why, because from the beginning, EU was basically economic organization. That's why it would be natural to assume that China has been the most important strategic partner for the EU. But little by little, I have a feeling that the European Union has been realizing in the importance of value and ideology. So European Union member states have been more critical to what happened within China, particularly Xinjiang and other areas, human wrongs. So that's why I think that first in European Union Global Strategic Paper of 2016, it was heavily focused on the importance of EU's cooperation with like-minded countries such as Japan and India in Asia. And then we also have to realize that now China is becoming really a difficult challenges to liberal international order. In the recently published interim national security strategy guidelines by the Biden administration, it assumes that China is the biggest challenge to China, not just the United States, but the international order as well. That's why to resist to this kind of difficult challenge by China to the liberal international order, Japan alone cannot, of course, defend it. EU alone cannot defend it. That's why we need much deeper cooperation among ourselves. EU began to regard China as a systemic rival. Systemic rival means that the Chinese vision for international order is different from EU's vision, and also Chinese political regime is different from European regime. And then let me introduce a comment by Andrew Small, eminent scholar, Asian scholar in Europe. He commented in a ECFR policy belief that, quote, Europe is in the nascent stages of a new debate about China. Last year, the European Union published a strategic outlook paper in which it labeled China as a systemic rival, reflecting a sharp change in its balance of assumptions about the Sino-European relationship. The pandemic is tilting that balance further. So this is a new trend, I would say, within the European Union or European countries. Then let me introduce briefly about Japan's FOIP, because already some of the part of that Japan strategy was mentioned by previous brilliant three speakers. So let me just focus on the importance of three pillars. The first pillar is rule of law. The second pillar is connectivity. And the third pillar is capacity building. So it's sometimes wrong to assume that Japan's strategy is to try to contain China rather than if China likes to join in that by emphasizing on the importance of rule of law. I wouldn't say that China is always against the rule of law. Sometimes China abide by law, and China also try to enhance rule-based international order. It depends. So that's why I wouldn't say that Japan single-mindedly try to contain China. But more and more, once China is becoming more powerful, China thinks that it doesn't really have to abide by law, because China is more powerful than before. So if China becomes more powerful, it means that China feels less necessary to respect international law. But of course, we basically welcome stronger China or more prosperous China. But we also welcome China, which really respect the rule of law. So this is one of the biggest puzzle for us. So let me end by mentioning the fact that Japan basically welcomed Europe's much deeper engagement in the Indo-Pacific because, of course, EU has been the champion of defending rule-based international order and liberal international order. So if Europe engage in the Indo-Pacific more, we expect that the region will be much better equipped with those international law or international agreements or rule-based international order. So that's why if European countries engage more in the region, I think that the Japanese foreign policy aim can be fulfilled with cooperation with these like-minded countries. That's why Foreign Minister Toshimitsu Motegi recently mentioned in his statement at the EU Foreign Affairs Council, January 25th, that Japan welcomes that as interest in the Indo-Pacific grow in Europe, Germany and the Netherlands publish their respective guidelines on the Indo-Pacific following France, and that the EU has started discussions on the Indo-Pacific. The US engagement is vital for tackling the challenges we face, and the collaboration among like-minded countries is important, unquote. So this simply shows that this Japanese foreign policy aim is exactly coincidental with President Biden's administration's foreign policy. That's why President Biden is now saying that he is ready to welcome Prime Minister Suga in Washington, D.C., and perhaps Prime Minister Suga will be the first person to meet in person to President Biden. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you so much, Professor Hoyosa, and all the speakers. I'm sure you're going to have very lively debate because different perspectives have been put on the table. Before starting to collect questions from the audience, I would like to raise a few questions myself to all the speakers. First, related with this idea of like-minded countries, because I think that that's one of the pillars, in which the relationship between Japan and the EU is grounded, not only, at the highest policy level, but I think that at a more broader level in the interaction among both societies. I think that when Europeans, try to think about having relations with Asia. It's easier for them to conduct relations with Japanese counterparts than with counterparts for some authoritarian countries, like Professor Hosoya said. But, my question is, to what extent can we equate this idea of being like-minded with this dichotomy between authoritarian countries and liberal democracies? Because as you know, in the Indo-Pacific region, there are authoritarian countries in which both the EU and Japan have strong relationships, not only at the economic level, and now I'm not referring to China. I'm not referring to China. Of course, China is on the table, it's the most obvious, but I'm not referring to China. I'm referring, for example, to some ASEAN countries. So to what extent, can we present this idea of like-mindedness, yes, from this liberal perspective or democratic perspective to authoritarian perspective? Because I get the feeling that to some extent, if we do so, we may be losing some partners in the region, and we share with them other values, because values are not only about democracy. So how can we reconcile that? That's one of my questions. And the other question is about the timing, because also some of the speakers have underlined the idea that 2021 would be like, could be a breakthrough in the bilateral cooperation. And I would like to put also one idea on the table right with the question, which is, if I'm not mistaken, the Trump administration served to some extent as a catalyst to the EU-Japan Economic Partnership Agreement and also to the Strategic Partnership Agreement, because at that time, we didn't trust the US anymore to be a reliable partner, So we started to look more carefully, to other partners, to other allies, and I think that happily we found each other, in those circumstances. But my question is that now that Biden is in the White House, and to what extent Japan and the EU will be willing to keep, moving forward on those economic and strategic partnership agreements now that we may feel comfortable, leaning back again, on Washington for some of these issues. I don't know. That's my second question. So I don't know. Just throwing that to the panel. Just feel free, to answer, in the order you.
So if you agree, I can start with the two questions. I will be short because I have some problems in my voice. But the first one, the dichotomy among democracies and authoritarian countries, and the role played by European Union in this field, in this debate, in the different countries, including not only China, as you said before, but also in the Asian countries. So, sorry. From my point of view, when we talk about the crisis in democracies, we are talking about the crisis in Western democracies, or specifically in the US, in the USA, and also in several European countries. There are other countries in Europe that they don't have any kind of problems in their democracies, and in the Asian, in the Indo-Pacific region, we have clear democracies like Japan, South Korea, Taiwan, and so on, and they are running very well, including in front of the crisis provoked by the COVID-19. No? So I think that we have to distinguish between some crises in some democracies and the discussion about the crisis of the democratic system as we know it from the Enlightenment or from the bourgeois revolutions. Well, in any case, we have to make a big effort to explain that we are absolutely self-confident about the quality of our democratic systems in front of an authoritarian regime, because the democratic system is guaranteeing freedom, guaranteeing the freedom and the dignity of the citizens, and they are absolutely capable to confront the main challenges that we have to confront. That's why the cooperation and the increase of political dialogue between Japan and the European Union is so important. It's so important because we share the same values. Everybody has said this without any kind of discussion. We share the same values. We're convinced that we have to preserve and to defend them in front of authoritarian regimes. And probably one way could be to support from Europe any possibility or any potential growth in the Indo-Pacific region, taking into account that the United States must play a very vital role. We can do nothing without the presence of the United States in the region. We have to be very, very, very clear. No? The potential alliance between the different democracies in the Indo-Pacific, like Japan, Korea, and so on, and New Zealand, is not enough to confront the expansion of China and the more and more aggressive Chinese foreign policy. So the trilateral dialogue between the United States with the Biden administration could be easy. Could be easier. The trilateral political dialogue is absolutely necessary today, and not only in the Indo-Pacific region, but also, and this is very important for us, for Europeans, it is also very important, this dialogue, talking about Europe and talking about the Atlantic Alliance, talking about NATO. Why? Because we have to rebuild mutual confidence among us, and to understand that different strategies and different approaches, at the end, they will be worse for everyone. Let me go now to the second issue, because it's related with this, no? About timing. Well, I think that we have to go ahead very quickly, to take profit of this window of opportunity, and well, to understand the recent speech of President Biden in NATO meeting some weeks ago, and also the different speeches in the Munich conference about global security. So we have now in front of in a window of opportunity to go ahead with the cooperation between the European Union and United States, and this must include the cooperation between the two powers in the Indo-Pacific region, and especially with Japan and India. So South Korea is very important, Australia is very important, or absolutely Indonesia will be more and more important in the future. But now the two main poles are in Japan and in India. And we have to introduce in our global strategy, in our European global strategy, this particularity. So to go ahead more and more in our relationship with these two countries, with Japan and with India. With Japan, we have an architecture of agreements. We have to work a lot on them, but I think that we have also to improve and to go ahead as well in our relationship with India, because India is a clear pillar for this alliance in the Indo-Pacific region in order to contain China's expansionism and to be in a good position for this ideological battle that you are facing up, as Professor Hosoya said very, very well before.
Maybe first Celine and then, I don't know, let's see.
Sorry, Professor Hosoya. Okay, thanks a lot for regarding your first question about like-mindedness, the question of values and how to reconciliate with the partnership we can have, or relation we can have with not so liberal, not so democratic countries. I believe it is a really key question and a very sensitive and complicated one. So I do not have a very straightforward answer, but I believe both the EU and Japan are advocating for an inclusive approach. So the idea is to engage with as many countries as possible. And of course, there is no concession made on the centralities of liberal and democratic values, but we have to encourage the partners, of course, to try to advance in a more democratic way, in a more liberal way, whenever we can. And then I believe there might be a difference in approach between the EU and Japan regarding the way to react when complicated situation arise, like in Myanmar right now. What should we do? Should we implement sanction? Should we keep the end, open and try to help them in a way or another? The EU has adopted its own Magnitsky Act to try to kind of sanction regime to put some cost on human rights violation. I believe Japan is maybe discussing this kind of possibilities. We'll see. It's quite complicated, maybe to try also to implement this kind of regime. But having engagement approach in an inclusive way, also try to use the multilateral schemes as much as possible, are ways to try to reconciliate this. Also because I think that Japan and the EU are trying to provide a kind of third way at some time, a kind of alternative way out of the confrontation between the US and China. So it's also important to try to build up the resilience and offer another option to the countries of Southeast Asia who do not want to choose a camp or to choose a side. And finally, just to say that it's not the same to support the democratic regime, to promote or to forcefully export one model. That's different. So we are not doing that. We are not trying to export the model. But at the same time, we are also in a kind of dilemma because we see China being more and more active to promote actually its own kind of authoritarian model, right? So at some point, we need to position them ourselves more in a more clearer way. Especially, I think of all the new technology, AI and digital tools that we are nowadays using. It's gonna change our everyday life. So depending on which kind of set of norm we are applying, we will go on a more authoritarian way or more liberal democratic way. So we need to really to come together on also between the EU and Japan on this particular field, I believe. For your second question, are we losing steam in the EU-Japan partnership because of the Biden administration? I don't think so. I think the partnership is still very much relevant. I believe the urgency lies in the deterioration of the international context and the situation. So we really need to work together. and maybe take advantage of the Biden administration also to work on a more trilateral coordination. It will be easier for both of us, and it will avoid some kind of complicated question also for Japan, maybe to try to figure out which partner to work with first. There's more way to reconciliate the approach between the two, and also to say that the Biden administration is actually pushing very much for their allies and partners to come together and to coordinate, especially in the Indo-Pacific. So it's also providing another kind of energy and incentive to work together. Thank you.
Thank you, Celine. Let's follow the order in the program. So now Professor Ono and then Professor Hosoya.
Okay, thank you very much. Maybe, because I'm not the expert on the security issues, but let me share my perspective based on what I following up what I discussed regarding timing. I really think that this year, 2021, is critical because I think that everybody is really striving for that recovery from the pandemic, including the vaccine, the sharing vaccination in the not only its own country but also region, well, also developing economies, also very important. Otherwise, we cannot kind of control the COVID. And then, what kind of recovery we want to achieve? I think everybody is really aspiring for that shared prosperities. But for that, I think that the rule-based approach through engagement and inclusiveness, such as green recovery or taking care of the human-centered approach or social aspect, those are, I think, very much important because I think those economic relationship is really, I think, really seamless. So I hope, I think EU and Japan, through that kind of trade investment and also development cooperation in complementary way to support that kind of the progress. Regarding dichotomy, it's a bit dilemma because, for example, I think as Selina mentioned about that Myanmar, it's really, we have to really think about what is a very good way to approach. We have to think about it carefully because maybe if we push too much, I think that I think maybe we don't want to that the current that the Myanmar military regime going to that assign that China. But at the same time, we have to think about maybe graceful exit of the maybe military administration. Maybe ASEAN, I think regional, I think countries can play an important role because they really emphasize the importance of inclusiveness, and centralities. So in which way we can engage or we can talk in ASEAN countries in a side way. So instead of maybe taking initiative from that upfront, EU or Japan, I think for maybe these kind of sensitive issues, we have to think about how we can work with ASEAN countries. And then ASEAN is not the kind of, it's also diverse. Maybe coastal ASEAN countries much more maybe support this maybe democratic or liberal value, but maybe other, some countries may not. So it's not the kind of one, the monolithic, that is much more diversities, but I think it's really important we have to work with maybe regional the countries and economies. And then I think through that, I think economic cooperation is a very important, maybe pragmatic way to do it. Thank you.
Professor Hodiosa, please.
Thank you very much. First of all, I like to say that we have to realize that we are living in a new age, considerably different from the old age. We are living in a time when economy is not quite separable to politics. And I have to say that 2-3 decades ago, Japan was perhaps the least ideological countries among liberal democracies. That's why Japan was playing a bridging role between African countries or Asian countries with Western countries, democracies. And Japan, as I said, Japan was trying to create much more inclusive order. Inclusive order means that we should include authoritarian regimes, Myanmar and a communist country like Vietnam, to try to become much more to try to create a solidarity in international community. But we are living in a considerably different time. And little by little, I think that the Japanese government is realizing that. As I explained 2 decades ago, Japan was trying hard to invite China to international community. And at that time, Japan was the biggest provider of both ODA and FDI to China, because we thought that if China would become much more prosperous, we expected that China would become much more reformist, much more liberal, and much more internationalist, and also much more peaceful. We are wrong. As you know, of course, Japanese business companies transfer huge amount of technologies to China, like Toyota transfers hybrid car technology to Chinese factories. Many Japanese companies transfers huge amount of technology, and also Japanese business companies invested heavily in China. But by using those technologies and money, China, within a few years, I would say, is trying to take Japanese islands with huge its military power. And also China has been exporting huge amount of surveillance spying cameras to developing countries, with which these dictators in these countries can be empowered. So China is criticizing liberal democratic regime. If you read People's Daily or Global Times during the COVID-19 time, actually they are criticizing liberal democratic regimes, and they are proud of their own regime. They are saying that they are winning kind of an ideological battle. So it's not Japan, but the United States under Biden administration, and also China under President Xi's administration. They are engaging in an ideological battle. And we have to choose a side, and we chose a wrong side in the 1930s. In 1936, Japan created an alliance relationship with Nazi Germany. At the time, Japanese government thought that based upon that alliance relationship with Nazi, we thought that we could create a better relationship with the United States. But we are wrong, because we are labeled as a fascist country by the United States. Because at that time, we needed to choose the side, and we chose Nazi side. That's why United States showed no willingness to be closer to Japan, regardless of the huge interest which can brought. So in that sense, I think that regardless of our will, we are entering into a new time where politics cannot be separable with economy, and also where both the United States and China, 2 giants, are engaging in a much more ideological battle. And we cannot stood by these trends. We are in a very difficult time. But of course, we don't have to encourage this ideological battle. Both Japan and the EU should present a different kind of order, much more rule-based international order, where China, of course, can join in, and where the United States can mitigate such kind of ideological confrontation. And that's why I think that EU-Japan cooperation is important, because both EU and Japan are less ideological in a sense, I do say, and much more inclusive and multilateralist in pursuit of foreign policy. And that's why I think that both Japan and the EU can present different kind of international order vision.
Thank you so much. We have collected a few questions from the audience. The problem now is that we only have like 10 more minutes, and we need to finish sharp. Okay, I will direct the questions to some of the specific speakers. One question directed to Professor Ono, related with the partnership agreement on connectivity between the EU and Japan. And the question asks about how this partnership agreement could be reinvigorated to have like more practical, a more practical dimension. And also that question asks about the implementation of that partnership, not only on the Indo-Pacific area, but also in Central Asia. Okay, so I will go one by one. Okay, so that's the first question.
Okay. Thank you very much. I think this connectivity issue is very much important, particularly like infrastructure, I understand. And then I think for that, EU already has a kind of strategy or connectivity initiative already put in place. And then in Japan, also through, for example, development cooperation, I think Japan has been working, like JICA has been working on the infrastructure project, or working with the ADB, or the World Bank, and also in partnership with EBRD, those things. So I think there are already some implementing kind of the core, the team working each other. So I think important issue is how we can kind of facilitate the communication each other closely. And so I really think that that is really that the infrastructure is a seamless development is that be important for everybody in the region. And so I really think that much more closer dialogue on practical, maybe like a possible project pipeline or financing, and those things will be very much important. Thank you.
The second question is addressed for the other three speakers. It's been mentioned that the possibility of having a kind of a trilateral approach between a coordination between the US, the EU, and Japan. And the question is about the perspective of having India joining that kind of approach. So that's the question for all the other three speakers. How do you think about the perspective of India joining? Do you think it's feasible, not feasible, the interest of India for joining?
No, it must be feasible. Because for the concept of Indo-Pacific, we need India. Without India, the concept is lost. So India is more and more important. And I think that United States and also Japan, of course, they have understood very well this, and including the cooperation in the military field. There has been military exercises in the Indic Ocean between, for example, Japan and India. Also cooperation with Australia. And from the United States point of view, there are more and more agreements between the United States and India in terms of not only military in a strict sense, but also in intelligence exchanges and security issues, including space and cyberspace. So for United States and for Japan and for the rest of the Asian countries, I think that the role of India is without any kind of discussion. The discussion could be if we Europeans have understood enough the importance of India in this new global geostrategic scenario. That's why I have to insist in the need to advance and to enhance the political dialogue between the European Union and India, because India is absolutely inevitable piece for all that we are now discussing.
Celine, you go ahead, and then Professor Hosoya first, and then Celine.
Briefly, I just like to mention about India. After 1945, Japan-India relationship have been always good because, of course, there is China just besides India. And, Japan and India have had no difficult political problem between us or territorial issues between us. But on the other hand, India has been always trying to become independent and also trying to defend a kind of a non-alignment ideology. So that's why my friends always said to me that everybody loves India, but India loves nobody. So whenever we are trying to be closer to India, but India try to maintain a kind of a much more independent foreign policy, allying with nobody. But on the other hand, we are seeing further India is moving to a new direction from the previous position to be closer to Japan or the United States or any other country because China is too powerful. But at the same time, India is trying to maintain good relationship with China. So in that sense, we should try to create a better relationship or cooperation with India. But we should also realize the difficulty to be closer to India. Perhaps Ambassador Hiramatsu knows very well about that because he was really successful in creating really stronger Japan-India cooperation, regardless of these historical past. So I think that India is moving toward a new direction to some extent.
Okay, so Celine, before giving you the floor, since we only have 4 minutes, I will raise the last question so you can ask both of them, if that is fine. Okay. The third question from the audience I would like to raise is about this ideological confrontation, about how different countries position themselves on that issue. The question is, which countries do you think that are more like on the fence? I mean, it was talk about this liberal democracies camp or the more authoritarian camp. And the question is about the countries that are on the fence. So which countries do you think are those?
Okay, thank you, Mario. Well, first maybe on India, as I really agree with what has been said. India is a central Indo-Pacific countries to advance the Indo-Pacific. That's for sure. That's a very key partner for the EU, for EU member states such as France, for Japan too. I think we should also look at the, as I said, the comparative advantage and special interest that we can find with India. If you look at the US understanding definition, geographic definition of the Indo-Pacific, it stopped at the western coastline of India, but the European understanding and the Japanese understanding is broader, and it's encompassed the Western Indian Ocean. So here is a kind of strategic areas of interest for the three players. So maybe we can advance our cooperation here. Another point, and I do not want to only raise the complicated issues this morning, but I believe that some development that we are seeing in India regarding domestic politics and some illiberal turns. These are quite complicated and maybe need also to be think about, to be addressed, and to be discussed maybe between us and how to work and engage with India at a time when we see some worrying domestic trends. So that would be my my answer to this.
Thank you so much, Celine. Thank you so much to all the other members of the panel. I think it's been a very stimulating and lively session. And also to all, our audience, all of you that are following us on YouTube. And now we have like a 15-minute break, so you can stretch your legs, and we will be back in 15 minutes for the second session. Thank you so much. See you soon. Take care.
Good morning, everyone. Good evening to our friends tuning in from Japan, and thanks for bearing with us today/tonight. My name is Luis Simon. I'm a senior analyst at Elcano and director of our Brussels office, also professor in international relations at the Free University of Brussels. I hope you enjoyed our first panel on EU-Japan cooperation as much as I did. In this second panel, we're going to try and unpack a little bit more the EU's and Europe's more broadly vision for the Indo-Pacific. As you know, the European Union is expected to publish some sort of general statement outlining a strategy or a vision or a concept, and I'm sure we'll get back to the semantics later, for the Indo-Pacific region sometime during the first semester of this year. And I think the recent publication of Indo-Pacific guidelines or strategies by 3 member states, France, Germany, and the Netherlands, provides a bit of the context for the emerging discussion on the EU and the Indo-Pacific. Now, even though the European Union does not have a specific concept or strategy for the region yet that we can point to, I believe that some sort of framework can be partly inferred from its actions and statements. I would say that the Indo-Pacific conversation is really picking up big time here in Brussels, both in EU and NATO circles, by the way, in the sense that there's an intense debate about what Europe's interests in the region are, what its level of engagement should be, and what its sort of modes of action also should be. So I think to unpack those questions, we've got a killer lineup in the second panel. We have with us Eva Peksova, who's a senior Japan fellow at the Center for Security, Diplomacy and Strategy of the Brussels School of Governance. She leads the newly established VUB Japan program, also with Celine Pajon, who was in the previous panel. She is going to tell us all we need to know, really, about the EU and the Indo-Pacific, and the EU's role there, and the emerging discussion on an EU strategy for the region. We also have Ken Jimbo, who's a professor at Keio University in Tokyo and a renowned expert on Japanese foreign and security policy and in the Pacific region. He's going to provide us with Japan's perspective on the region and of the EU's role and Europe's role therein. Then we have, thirdly, Gudrun Wacker, who's a senior fellow at SWP in Berlin, a leading German think tank. She is herself a leading expert on China in Europe, and I believe she's going to dwell on the whole question of Europe's vision for the Indo-Pacific, but hopefully helping us put that discussion in a broader perspective by sort of bringing in the member state dimension, in particular looking at the German and French concepts for the region, how they compare to each other, and also perhaps the Dutch. Last, but by no means least, we've got our own Fidel Sendagorta, who's the Director General of Foreign and Security Policy at the Spanish Foreign Ministry and a go-to person for all things Asia and Indo-Pacific in Spain. Fidel is going to talk to us about how Spain sees the region and also how it sees the whole debate on the emerging debate on an EU strategy for the region. All right, in terms of rules of the game, we've got about 90 minutes, so until 1, so we'll end this at 1 p.m. sharp. Each of the speakers will have some 8 to 10 minutes for initial remarks, and after that, we'll open the floor for questions and comments from the public. You can send your questions to the email address that we've provided for this event, which is events@realcano.org. I think you can see the band appearing on your screen. All right, so without further ado from my side, we're going to get the ball rolling, starting with Eva. Eva, welcome to Elcano. Pleasure to have you. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Luis, for the kind introduction, and thanks to Elcano for convening this very interesting event and for having me, of course. I only have 10 minutes to talk about the European perspective on the Indo-Pacific, which is rather short. So I decided to go rather straightforward by presenting on the why, where, and how can the EU contribute to regional security. Well, the why seems pretty obvious. We have talked about the many interests, but what has been quite striking, I think, for those who have been observing some of the regional developments is that the EU has been taking its time. The EU is indeed a latecomer in the Indo-Pacific debate. That doesn't mean it hasn't been interested or concerned by the developments, but it's rather reflecting a very vibrant internal debate that has been taking place inside the European Union, and that in a way actually accompanies and reflects its own process of becoming a foreign and security policy actor. The biggest, let's say, reason for this delay has been its cautiousness to take sides, put very bluntly, between the United States and China. Of course, the whole Indo-Pacific concept, the moment it emerged, has become perceived as rather ideologically biased and polarizing potentially the Indo-Pacific space. And the European Union leadership was very much cautious to actually get into the debate in the first place. Now, of course, that has been changing. As Luis already said, we are now working towards a strategy outlook, whatever it's going to be called, probably published by May, June this year, which is a result partly of a maturing, let's say, European position, partly of a bottom-up pressure by its European member states. As you know, France has been the first Indo-Pacific European power, joined later by Germany and the Netherlands, and I believe Gudrun will be speaking extensively about this. But partly also because the Indo-Pacific debate has grown beyond its geographical borders. It has become a battlefield, an ideological battlefield. And I was very pleased to hear that in the first session, because that's really what we see in everyday basis. It has become a battle between the liberal democratic order and the kind of growing authoritarian revisionist tendencies, between cooperation and unilateralism, and between the rule of law and the lack of it. And this is a sort of battlefield that the European Union doesn't want to be missing. Now, where it focuses, there are 4 priority areas that we are sure to find in the upcoming strategy. We are pretty much sure to find it there because there is a non-paper that has been circulated already in December by Germany, Netherlands, and France. It is the 4 kind of cross-cutting areas, transnational areas that the EU is very skilled and has extensive experience and expertise in. It is maritime security, connectivity, trade, and global issues. Maritime security, again, it has been mentioned already, but there's quite a few areas where it really can bring a substantial added value, capacity building with third parties, functional cooperation, maritime domain awareness, law enforcement, you name it. Connectivity has been a key pillar of the European engagement in and with Asia, also together with its partners, including Japan, sustainable connectivity. Trade and global issues meaning environmental security, meaning climate change, meaning good governance. This is not discussed enough, but these are precisely the type of issues that are easily overlooked in an environment that has been dominated by this great power, rivalry, and interstate tensions. Now, how it intends to go about it, or what could be really the added value for the EU, we already mentioned the rules-based order and governance. We already mentioned the importance of working with like-minded partners. And here I would like to add the importance of minilateralism. I think we don't focus enough on that. It is not just EU and Japan, but we really can be quite flexible in who to take on board. It can be India, it can be ASEAN, it can be Australia, it can be United States, based on the different functional areas that we want to address. Thirdly, multilateralism and cooperative security. That's an obvious low-hanging fruit. Working closer with ASEAN, working within the ASEAN Regional Forum, but also within the Indian Ocean Rim Association and the many multilateral structures around the Indian Ocean is something that the EU can be very helpful in. And finally, and that's a very concrete point and something that is very much missing in the Indo-Pacific debate, I believe that Europe can be a bridge between Eurasia and Indo-Pacific. We never talk about this kind of, missing connection link between the continental and the maritime dimension of this new, increasingly interconnected space, where the EU has extensive experience in dealing with Russia, in securing its eastern neighborhood, that can be perhaps useful when discussing some of the Indo-Pacific issues with its like-minded partners, whether it's hybrid threats, whether it's disinformation, whether it's human rights, etc., etc. I understand my time has run out, so I will stop here and I look forward to the discussion.
All right, Eva, thank you very much. I think loads of important points that I'm sure we'll come back to. The whole continental and maritime connection, I think, is something worth bearing in mind for later. Also, what you were saying about the cautiousness to take sides, which is a theme that sort of came up during the previous panel. I'm sure we'll go back to that point as well. We're going to get a Japanese perspective on the region and on the EU's emergent debate and potential role there. So over to you, Ken. Thanks for joining us again.
Well, thank you very much. And I'd like to begin by thanking Elcano for inviting me to this very exciting discussion on the Indo-Pacific and the role of European states and EU. My role here today is to address how Tokyo has been viewing the recent so-called EU's pivot to the Indo-Pacific and what kind of roles we expect members of the EU to play in this region, and the opportunities and challenges for the Japan-EU cooperation. And I think by listening to today's symposium on the session 1 and Eva's excellent presentation, I think it has already shown how the Indo-Pacific become the powerful gravity in forging EU's engagement in this region. And there have been more opportunity for direct policy coordination between EU and Japan. And from our China policy, whether on the security, trade, and investment to maritime order, economic framework to digital economy, and those are the lists of potential areas of cooperation, and you can name it more. It is a great news for Japan to get EU and the European states on board in dealing with major strategic issues that we face. So our strategic portfolio has been significantly strengthened with the EU's direct presence. And basically, Tokyo takes the more, the better perspective on EU, and there are even more potentials to be further explored. So let me briefly point out how different we are now from what we were in the recent past, and there were brief moments in mid-late like 2000, nearly like 15 to 20 years ago, that both NATO and EU aspired for the global engagement strategy, and especially in dealing with global war and terror and the peace-building missions abroad, which provided temporarily new opportunities for Europe-Japan strategic cooperation. But in 2010s was a decade that I think Europe and Japan both experienced the so-called recession of the global strategic mapping. For European states, there has been the re-emergence or reassertive Russia in Crimea, Eastern Ukraine, in Syria, and that have become a primary security concerns for many of those European states. Together with the disruption of the Syria internal conflicts and the spillover effects in the refugee inflows and migrations, and growing concern about terrorism in major European cities, definitely changed the landscape of the European perspective in 2010s. And so as in Japan, and our primary concern in 2010 have become more determined to focus on China and also on North Korea. Throughout such strategic orientations, Tokyo's relative interest in global engagement have declined. That is especially true for our a forced deployment posture in PKO or in the international missions. And currently we have almost like a zero forces in the PKO operations abroad. So I remember that attending the Europe-Japan meeting in mid-2010s, and I vividly noticed that many of those European scholars were saying that, look, we are all busy with our own problems, and there are little opportunity for Japan to, be in that scope. And while there were trends that we are strategically become a bit remote in comparison with the setting that we had in the mid-2000s, but that took place when major European states stepped up the robust economic engagement in China, right? So there was a certain amount of concerns and frustrations in Tokyo on Europeans' engagement in China, especially at the time the maritime orders in East China Sea and South China Sea had rapidly degraded. And I think that those similar logic may also apply to Japan's rapprochement towards Russia, even after 2013. And for many European eyes, Japan was seen undecisive, so to say, in forming common front towards Russia, with gaining somewhat like opportunities by playing Russia off against the EU and United States with one another. So my message in several years ago was, let's look at both China and Russia as a global concern. And when we approach them individually, let's coordinate the policy between Japan and EU by incorporating security and economic concerns of both of us, right? So let's look at the common nature of the challenges we face today, from hybrid warfare, expanding anti-access environment, and the constant challenge to maintain status quo. So these happen in the different place and different scales, but there were much that Japan and EU need to share the strategy by referencing of the strategic situation of each other. So that was only a few years ago. And now I think we are in the new phase, and more European states regard Indo-Pacific as one of the major theater and the region to engage in, and regarding China as more like a direct strategic concern. And there are more European economic and security assets that are forward deployed in Indo-Pacific region. And that would also trigger like a more decisive response on the part of EU and also its member states. And for Tokyo's perspective, there are opportunities for doubling down on that situation. And I think that could be specified in following aspects. And I think I will be repeating some of the argument that has already been raised in the earlier session. First, I think the EU plays a pivotal and significant role in leading norms in especially issue of the conflict that we face in Indo-Pacific. And especially when we promote so-called rule-based international order, the European voice is pivotal in forming perception standards in Indo-Pacific. And especially by looking at the fact that China may not be able to ignore EU, especially when China forges the international campaign for its justification on their own agendas. And EU's position on the maritime order, maritime jurisdictions, China's legal interpretation on many fronts, human rights issue, and I think those are the powerful force in forming the China strategy, and the EU's value-added presence is pretty much important in this perspective. And I think that is also quite an important case that with the EU's involvement, many of the issues that we face to be automatically be internationalized. China always used the term that this is a domestic issues. It's our own issues and nobody should be involved with it. But with the more kind of forward deployed presence of the EUs that are involved both in the security and the economy, it is very hard to say that none of the issue can be treated as domestic issues. And if the EU deploy the forces, we do the joint exercise together. And if EU have a more like a deeper collaboration with the coastal states of ASEAN or India and those others, and something that China will engage in the confrontational issues in the Indo-Pacific could have a direct connection with the EU's interests. And I think those trends will be further promoted in the trends that you are now dealing with. And second, I think enhancing the practice of cooperation and institutionalizations is also a very important key in the areas of the joint exercises, HADR cooperation, capacity building of the maritime capacities, joint financing on the infrastructures are all important areas of cooperation that Japan and EU can promote further. And I especially encourage EU to join in the Indo-Pacific infrastructure development together with Japan's JBIC, US OPIC, and Australian EFIC to promote the high quality investments. And I think that I don't think we are 100% sure about whether we can actually divide and rules the supply and value chains in Asia, because many of those economic interdependence are more complexly organized. But in terms of the new investments and also the infrastructure funds, there are more things that we can explore further on that end. And so finally, I would also like to see EU and Japan coordinate further on, as I mentioned, the supply chain management strategy. By listening to the first session that they also mentioned about Biden administration's first 100 days plan to review the vulnerability in the US supply chains here in Indo-Pacific regions. And that will promote formally called blue dot networks or clean supply chain, somewhat without Chinese economic involvement. So however, as I mentioned, our region continues to play the marginal buy-in status from China, and Japan is also the major part of it, and also EU is also a major part of it in such a buy-in status on China. So while there is a need to forge a robust coalition counter against the Chinese economic assertiveness, but also the regional reality remains to lie in the nested value chains that are inclusive of China. So I think that I'd like to see the EU and Japan's coordination on this matter to make the economic order of Asia more, I think, conducive to the reality in Indo-Pacific region. And I'll stop here and looking forward to the discussion. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, Ken. When I listen to Japanese colleagues and experts talk about the EU's added value in the region as they see it, this notion of the EU being a normative superpower, or at least the power to be reckoned with on the normative front, keeps coming up. You also put a very important idea on the table, I think, which is let's coordinate our policies on China and Russia, not least because they're doing it and they're looking at how the Indo-Pacific and European theaters intersect with each other and how they can drive wedges. So I'm sure we'll go back to that important point. Let's now move on to Gudrun for some more granularity on the European debate. Gudrun, welcome. Floor is yours.
Yes, thank you, and thank you for the invitation to participate in this meeting. I think it has been very interesting so far, and many different aspects have been brought to the table. I would like to make 3 points about the member states' approach, the 3 member states that have formulated some sort of policy or guidelines or strategy vis-a-vis the Indo-Pacific. The background is that France, and I will come back to why this was the first country in the European Union to formulate something like an Indo-Pacific strategy, starting with Macron's speech in Australia at a naval base in May 2018. And after that, France published several policy papers by the Ministry of Defense first, and then the foreign ministry followed in 2019. It took Germany somewhat longer, but already in 2019, I think there was a basic agreement between Germany and France to pursue this together and try to, see whether it can be translated into a EU agenda. So the German guidelines, which are very, very comprehensive and very hard to read, were published in September 2020, and the Netherlands then followed with sort of a non-paper on the Indo-Pacific, which is kind of short, but also very well structured and very clear in November 2020. I think for France and for Germany and for the Dutch paper, it's very explicit that they want this to be building blocks for a European positioning, whether it's a vision or a strategy or whatever. We are not sure yet where this will lead to, but it's very clear that this is not sort of a national positioning, but it's a contribution or meant as a contribution to a EU positioning. I also think it's very important to look at the timing of the German and the Dutch paper, because I think that the fact that ASEAN published its own outlook on the Indo-Pacific made it much easier for Germany and for the Netherlands to overcome some of the concerns they had in adopting the term Indo-Pacific. But with ASEAN coming out with their own strategy, this was made easier. My second point are the main differences between the three countries and the commonalities. The biggest difference, I think, is the starting point, the point of departure, because for France, it's very different from the Netherlands and Germany. France is the only European member state after Brexit that still has territories in the region, and actually the very broad geographical definition of the French, what the Indo-Pacific is. It's reaching from the east coast of Africa, basically to the west coast of the Americas, is defined by these overseas territories they have off the coast of Africa to off the coast of the Americas. And not only do they have these overseas territories, but there is 1.6 or 1.7 million French citizens. There is a military presence, a permanent military presence there. And also they have the second biggest exclusive economic zones in the world, of which 90% are in these regions. So this is very different from Germany and the Netherlands, who don't have overseas territories in the region and come from a very different angle. I think we should also keep in mind that after Brexit, France is the only remaining EU member with a permanent seat in the Security Council and the only nuclear power in the European Union, which sort of gives it a very unique position, so to speak. So one of the French very fundamental interests is to safeguard French citizens and territories in the region. Now, Germany and the Netherlands, their point of departure is that they have interests as big trading nations. This is their starting point. So they come from an economic angle, but this has implications, of course, for the security in the region. So as trading nations, Germany and the Netherlands depend on open sea lanes and the free access to markets in the region. And their second departure point is a vital interest in safeguarding and defending the rules-based order at the global level, but also at the regional level, because it would affect these countries, but also the European Union in general very much if this is, called into question. There are also differences in defining the geographic space. The Germany and the Netherlands are a little bit more vague than the French papers. There is a difference in the length and status of the documents, and also the government institutions involved. The German one is the only whole of government approach paper, which explains probably that it's so comprehensive. But there are also fundamental commonalities between the three, and I think these are feeding into the European process and are supposed to provide a common platform for the EU. One is the assessment of the strategic trends in the region and the importance this has for the European Union. So there is this, you know, the center of gravity has shifted to this region, but it's also one of the theaters where the Chinese-US rivalry will play out and where the future of the international order will be shaped. So they agree on that. And they also agree on their basic objectives, which they want to achieve in the region. I mean, peace and stability, we all want that. The question is how to get there. Also, it has to be underlined that all three approaches are inclusive of China. And this is very important because the discussion we had this morning and also we have in this panel, this is the real challenge. How to include China. But all the papers rarely mention the United States. So do we try to dodge the question? You know, do we try to avoid taking sides, or do we try, I mean, in a way it reflects exactly the hard balance and the choices we made in the strategic outlook on China, saying China is a cooperation partner, a competitor, and a systemic rival at the same time. So this is reflected in the Indo-Pacific strategy as well. Multilateralism is very important. Of course, this is the DNA, so to speak, of the European Union. And it is very explicit in the German paper. We neither want a unipolar region nor a bipolar region. We want that countries in the region are not forced to make a choice between the United States and China. And the objective is also clear: diversifying our partnerships in the region, deepening partnerships with individual countries. What we understand as like-minded can change from topic to topic, I would say. And also lowering the dependency of China is one of the objectives. So these initiatives can not only play out at the EU level, but also for the member states, the three countries, in the G7, in the G20, within the UN, and France and Germany and the Netherlands are all members of this Alliance for Multilateralism. So there are other contexts where the Indo-Pacific strategy will play a role. Finally, I come to the major challenges that I see. One is how to cooperate and coordinate with the United Kingdom. They will probably this year come out, or they're expected to come out with their own strategy, what global Britain means, and the Indo-Pacific tilt, as it is called, is widely expected. So this will be a challenge. And the biggest one is this balance between the US and China. How can you square the circle, so to speak? Because in a way, I think the perception in Europe is we don't want to make this choice between the US and China, and other countries should also not be forced to make this choice. So I think we will have a debate about this, you know, ideological battle. Have we really taken sides, or are we still trying to steer a middle course here? Then I think it will be important to have a coordinated division of labor. What can be done at the EU level? What can member states do, either bilaterally or in other contexts? As long as we have no qualified majority vote on foreign and security policy in the EU, necessarily there will have to be other coalitions that go forward, like the Notverbal that was mentioned in the first session. I think Ken Jimbo already alluded to the priorities. I mean, we're still in the middle of the pandemic. So for me, always the question is, do we have the sustained political will to really fill this with life? And do we come up with the necessary financial material and human resources to do all of what we have promised? My biggest concern, and this is really from reading the German guidelines, where you have 7 interests and 8 principles, and they're all sort of on the same level, according to the German government. Do we have priorities? If we have to make the hard choices, and the one on China and the US is a very hard choice, do we have our priorities right? And I think that's the biggest challenge always for the EU. Otherwise, you have a laundry list of things that, but you try to avoid making these hard choices. And that's it from me.
All right, Gudrun, thank you very much for running us through some of the common themes that we find in the German, Dutch, and French visions, and also for pointing out some of the differences, which I guess relate more to France's own peculiarities and the stronger focus on security, as you alluded to. And I guess we can get back to that later on, and also bring in the UK. Thanks for touching on that, by the way. Because it seems to me that Britain is sort of moving in a similar direction to France, at least in terms of ship deployments and military cooperation with regional countries. So I'm sure we'll get back to that, because there's a lively discussion in Japan on the role of France and the UK specifically when it comes to the security file. Fidel, we've heard about the EU's approach and that of 3 important member states. It'd be great if you could give us now a sense of the Spanish debate on this whole Indo-Pacific business. Bienvenido cuando quiera, Fidel.
Well, many thanks, Luis, and a great opportunity to discuss about, I think, a very relevant issue for the future. It's true that in the last few years, this vision of the Indo-Pacific did not catch up with the Spanish politics, and I think it was perceived more as part of the Trump administration vision, and therefore there was little empathy towards this concept. There was very little discussion that it was not only an American concept, but there was a Japanese concept, an ASEAN concept, an Australian concept, but it was only seen as part of the American administration plans. At the same time, I think scholars like you and Mario and Fernando de Laje had been working on this issue for the last few years, and therefore providing some reflection on the matter. Now, definitely with this initiative to have a EU strategy, I think finally Indo-Pacific is catching up with also with our own ministry and with other ministries as to how to what are our national interests in this exercise, what are our assets, how can we contribute to this exercise in Brussels, and so on. So firstly, I think what we're trying to do is to frame the Indo-Pacific concept into what we expect about it and what are our own vision. And I would say this could be summed up in the following points. First, the centrality of the Indo-Pacific in our geopolitical landscape. It's I think it's already been assumed as something for sure, definite, and therefore that we need more knowledge, better analysis about the region, and we have to focus more on the region. Second, that there is increasingly the conviction that our vision for the region cannot be like in the past, just business-minded, that we need to take into account great power rivalry and therefore the security factor. Still, I must say that our security priorities are closer home, and especially focused on the north of Africa, the Middle East, and now the Sahel, which is our greatest worry in terms of security. But I mean, Indo-Pacific is coming slowly but surely also into this security picture. Third, a desire not to frame our relationship with China in terms of confrontation or building new military blocks in a remake of the Cold War. I think other European countries are of the same opinion. Fourth, that there is a projection to the Indo-Pacific of the new European doctrine on China. That is to say that China is considered simultaneously as a partner, as a competitor, and a rival, a systemic rival. Fifth, that we always hold a European perspective to our national foreign policy, and this is no exception. I can name the case of the EU-Asia connectivity strategy, and how the fact that Europe has its own connectivity strategy was, I think, a very big reason why Spain did not join the Belt and Road Initiative, as Beijing was offering to us to do. Six, that there is an increasing interest in developing links with like-minded countries around the world, and especially in this region. So the concept of like-minded is more and more important as a part of our vision to this region, as values are also important part of our foreign policy. So what would be our assets and eventually our contributions to the current discussions in the European Union? I would say we can name 4 areas. The first one is, of course, connectivity. I think Spain will fight to have more political traction into the EU connectivity strategy. We need the European Commission and probably her president, Madame von der Leyen, to lead these efforts, and also our High Representative. We would fight also to enlarge to Africa and to Latin America the scope of this connectivity strategy. If we are to compete with the Belt and Road, those regions are important to us and to Europe at large, and we think the strategies should apply also there. Also, I think we have assets that we could bring to bear into this implementation of this connectivity strategy. We have good firms in the fields of renewable energies and infrastructure. They are already joint ventures with Japanese firms in railways, in renewables, and also with Korean companies in third countries. So that could, we find there's economic interest there too. Second, in the area of security, and especially maritime security, Spain is a security provider in the Indian Ocean through our participation in the Atalanta European Union operation, which is focused on anti-piracy in the Horn of Africa shores, but which positions us as an actor maybe in the periphery of the Indian Ocean, but still in the Indian Ocean. And, we are, I think, getting a very precious experience also from the patrolling of the region. And we have a special leadership in this operation, as the headquarters, as you know, is in the Spanish base of Rota. Thirdly, in the defense industry, it bridges our interest in business with our interest in security, as many of these partnerships with third countries have always a dimension of extending cooperation to the navies or to the air forces of those countries in which with which our companies are doing business. And I will name two. First, Australia. In the last 14 years or so, our shipbuilder Navantia has built 3 destroyers, 2 landing helicopter docks, 2 logistic ships, and another equipment. And this has developed a strong, cooperation also between the navies of the two countries. With India, we are pending a political decision for a contract of 56 Airbus transport airplane C-295 to manufacture 16 in Spain and 40 in India. And I'm sure if this contract is finally signed, we'll also strengthen our links also in the Air Force sector. On trade, which would be the fourth area, Spain has wholeheartedly supported free trade agreements with Japan in the past years ago, with South Korea, with Singapore, Vietnam, and now with Australia and New Zealand. I think it's important that Spain will keep supporting these free trade agreements in the European Union, as I think to compensate for, because it's our conviction, but also to compensate for a lack, I think, of enthusiasm by the United States, including with this administration, in free trade agreements. Also because trade, it's also a bridge with China. We have seen how Europe has signed this. It's not a trade agreement, but it's an investment agreement that has trade consequences. We have concluded the negotiations for the comprehensive investment agreement with China, and Japan and other partners in the Indo-Pacific have concluded also. They have signed the regional comprehensive economic partnership with China. So trade, it's I think it's an area in which we don't see a zero-sum game. As a conclusion, let me say, I think the new U.S. administration, with its emphasis on alliances, will promote closer links between their allies in Europe and their allies in the Indo-Pacific. This is on the basis of as I said before, of the concept of like-mindedness, which is about values. But I will point out that not always values play the same role in our foreign policies and in Indo-Pacific foreign policies. I think for Indo-Pacific countries like Japan, the emphasis is more on a rule-based international order, the law of the sea, freedom of navigation. For European countries, it's all this, but also human rights, which I don't think it's an issue which is so prominent in the foreign policies of our partners in the Pacific. Being like-minded also has consequences in the field of technology, as technology is increasingly more and more linked to security and to values also. So I think it will have consequences in for Europe to find partners for research and development projects in the region, also to tackle together the issues related with double-use export control in emerging technologies, and finally to work together to, in the new challenges that cyber security poses for all of us. Cyber space is not a territorial space, but still is an important security concern for both for Europe and for our like-minded partners in the Indo-Pacific. Thank you very much, Luis.
All right, thank you, Fidel. Thank you very much for your comprehensive overview of Spain's view, and also for putting this whole thing in perspective and sort of cross-referencing the Indo-Pacific conversation with other European and Spanish foreign and security policy priorities, including the importance of the immediate neighborhood, so to speak. By the way, Fidel, if you don't mind turning off the microphone, because there's a bit of a, yeah. Thank you. And I think you also made an important point, which is that the Indo-Pacific and the relevance of the Indo-Pacific is a reality, right? Even if Europeans are focusing more on other regions, that whatever happens in the Indo-Pacific will have an impact on Europe's prosperity and security one way or another, regardless of whether they're engaged or they're not, right? That sort of reminds me of Clausewitz's take on war, right? That you might not be interested in war, but war is interested in you. So something similar could be said of the Indo-Pacific, I guess. Thank you, Fidel, and thanks to all four of you for your terrific opening statements. We're now going to open it up. We've got about 35 minutes or so, because at 12:55, I intend to pass the baton over to my colleague Mario Esteban, who coordinated this event, for some wrap-up remarks. Some questions are coming in already. I remind you to please send your questions to events@rielcano.org. For now, I'm going to sort of ruthlessly avoid my position as moderator for a general observation and a couple of questions for our speakers. So I will do my thing, and then we'll go back to the panel for sort of 3-minute snap reactions, and then we'll bring in the questions from the audience that I already have, and those that may come in the meantime. So as I see it, one big takeaway that I got from this panel, but also from the previous panel, is that there's a link between the European conversation on the Indo-Pacific and the European conversation on Sino-American competition and what it means for Europe. There were some references to equidistance in the previous panel, and some references to Europe's cautiousness when it comes to taking sides in this panel. I think Eva alluded to that. My own sense is that the European debate has evolved quite a lot over the last year or so. Europeans are indeed increasingly aware that competition between the United States and China has become a sort of structuring feature in international politics. Last year in particular, there was a very intense debate in Europe around Sino-American competition and what it meant for Europe, not least in the context of the Trump administration and his whole approach to international politics. I'm not sure equidistance is the right concept here to talk about Europe. I think the bonds that bring Europe and America together are just too deep and too organic. So I don't think it makes sense to speak of equidistance. But the way I see the EU's take, or at least the one advanced by High Representative Borrell, seems to be to reject the idea that Sino-American competition should be a referent at all for EU foreign policy, not least because it imposes a binary frame on Europeans and a binary choice on Europeans, right? That's why he speaks of the Sinatra doctrine that was mentioned in the previous panel, as in Europe going its own way and not China's way or America's way. That means that the EU will make its own decisions on the basis of its own interests and not some sort of pressure to take sides, right? And that's different from equidistance, the way I see it. Having said that, and this was also mentioned, EU officials continue to contrapose, so to speak, their own so-called nuanced view of China, which they define as a partner in multilateralism, an economic competitor, and a systemic rival simultaneously, with America's sort of rivalry frame, right? My sense is, and here comes the question, my sense is that this is going to be harder to do under Biden, because Biden has already referred to the need to work with China in some areas, like climate, pandemics, therefore arguably narrowing the gap between the European and American approach, at least somewhat. Also, Biden does not speak of a naked sort of state-on-state power contest between the United States and China, but rather frames this as part of a broader struggle between democracy and autocracy. So in normative terms, which is a language that Europeans understand. And also, unlike Trump, who saw multilateralism as a liability in the context of US competition with China, Biden actually sees multilateralism as an asset, as something to be systematically and strategically leveraged in the context of competition with China. So my question for you, for the whole panel, is, do you think Biden's new approach, more sort of nuanced and sort of soft-handed approach, will have any impact on Europe's attitude towards China? And I guess, sort of slightly rewarded for Ken, how is Biden's new approach to China? And we know that there are still many questions, but you know, the national security guidelines were put out a couple of days ago by the White House, so there's already some content. So how is Biden's new approach to China, or at least the noises that we're getting from the Biden administration, how is that perceived in Japan? What are the risks and opportunities, particularly if we compare it to Trump's approach, right? Then a couple more questions. One, which I guess would be more for Ken, but happy to hear what others might think about it, is, do you see any cracks in the Sino-Russian relationship going forward? And can those cracks be exploited, or is that naive and counterproductive? And then a question for Eva, which I guess also connects with the Sino-Russian question in some way, which is that you alluded to the need to connect the continental and maritime aspects of the conversation, of the Indo-Pacific conversation, and the EU's potential to do that. So can you give us a bit more detail on what it is that you have in mind exactly? All right, so if you don't mind, then we'll follow the order. So 2 or 3 minutes each, or 3-4 minutes each. Eva, then Ken, then Gudrun, then Fidel, and then we'll open it up for a second round. Eva.
Well, thank you, Luis, for the question. I'll start with your continental maritime one and then move to the Biden one. When it comes to the Indo-Pacific concept, actually, the moment it emerged, I have been puzzled that basically it was created in a reaction, in a way, to the Belt and Road Initiative. But while the Belt and Road had the belt and the road, the Indo-Pacific was only focusing on the road, on the maritime dimension. Now that is quite understandable because the maritime dimension is much more important for global trade and because of the strategic presence of some of the main protagonists of the Indo-Pacific concept, be it the United States, be it India, be it Australia or Japan. But since we are now talking, 4 years later, almost 5 years later, about this shift from the geographical limitation of the concept to the ideological sphere, then we are no longer limited by the maritime versus continental realm that much. I mean, yes, of course, if we talk about maritime security, but since we are talking about the battle of values, norms, and the problem of maintaining the rule or reforming the rules-based order, we are way beyond. And there are, in fact, many similarities between, let's say, okay, the main culprits being Russia and China in their modus operandi, be it using connectivity and economic integration to exercise influence on their neighborhood or on the smaller states in the region. You can see that with the Eurasian Economic Union in Central Asia. You can see that with China kind of all over the Indo-Pacific space, whether it's on human rights, whether it's in exercising political pressure, revisionist tendencies, you name it. So especially in the context of rapprochement between Russia and China, I think there's a worrying amount of similarities that are much broader and much more important than just a sort of a geographically limited Indo-Pacific space. In fact, no one really looks at it except for India. If you look at India, actually has this double exposure to the continental and maritime vision, and it has been trying increasingly actually to look through the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, for instance, to look a little bit more out to the continent. But it brings me to what Ken said, and also to your question. You know, it would be a nice bridge, as you said, as I said, actually. Because while, you know, we have been somehow, we Europeans, obsessed with Russia and our immediate neighborhood, then basically we also accumulated a lot of expertise and experience in dealing with those threats, encountering those threats. And in a way, whether it is, I already mentioned disinformation, but also putting in place structures that deal with it. And this brings us to NATO. And this brings us, for instance, in the possibility of using the NATO vehicle as one of the potential tools to address some of the Indo-Pacific problems. And that kind of brings me nicely to the US-China question. Short answer would be, in my personal view, yes. I think that Biden will change quite a lot. I think Gudrun said timing was quite important in the release of those strategies. It is quite striking to see that the German and the Dutch strategy do not mention US, but mention China extensively. I think that's something really we should take note of. And it can be also partly related to the fact that it has been released at the time where Europeans and part of the US allies have been kind of, I wouldn't say fed up, but have been, feeling unable to actually continue their positive engagement or more constructive engagement with Washington. That really changes. But I think there's an important thing to notice in this debate on whether equidistance or Sinatra doctrines, or where does EU stand in this triangle. I don't think that EU, unless it's being perhaps a little bit cynical, at this moment can afford to be equidistant. This whole debate on strategic autonomy is nice, but let's be honest, we are not there yet. China knows that. Europeans know it. It's a good ambition. It's very good, but it certainly does not mean doing things alone. So defending our own interests, our interest can sometimes also overlap with the American interest. We need to identify where they are, and for that we need to also work closer with the United States. It does not mean basically just doing our own thing alone. Our interest and our way is also to work with like-minded partners, and the United States in some domains is certainly one of them.
All right, thank you very much for that, Eva. Ken, we've got Biden versus Trump, China versus Russia, continental versus maritime. Pick your flavor. What are your thoughts?
Great. I think that those are all great questions. First of all, I've been always arguing that the concept of like Indo-Pacific can only be successful if we embrace the different copyrights claimed by the different countries, because there are no one-fits-all concept for the Indo-Pacific. Fidel mentioned about the US perspective, but if you read what has been said in Tokyo, ASEAN, Australia, India, there are all different versions of the Indo-Pacific, using the same language, have a common platform, but a significantly different emphasis. And I was fortunate to learn there has been more nuances in Europe within the claimants of the strategy have slightly different focus and emphasis and approaches towards the Indo-Pacific. And I think understanding of those nuances are essential in forging what kind of like a policy approach that we share together. That's my first comment. Second, Louis mentioned about the US-China competition. And I think by listening to the Tokyo's debate, I think you will find two different voices. And I think the first has been well mentioned by many of the strategic thinkers that Japan's priority in the Indo-Pacific is definitely that we are going to keep the Americans in to these regions. So the US-Japan alliance and partnership approaches, diversification of the strategic portfolio based on the US involvements are the basic approaches that Japan is going to promote. So you can find the Quad approaches and the US-based kind of, economic approaches, and you can name it. And those are basically the directions how Tokyo's tried to utilize the Indo-Pacific to create the kind of more like superiority standards vis-a-vis emerging alternatives, mostly posed by China. Those are basically the competition ideas to utilization of the Indo-Pacific. But at the same time, that by digging out what we are trying to achieve in the economy, Gudrun mentioned about the China inclusion, and you can find the certain aspects of the China inclusion debate in the Japan as well, especially if we go to Keidanren business community. They all invest in mainland China. They all involved in those supply and value chains, and they believe that they are, I think, the growth potential still lies in the future of China. So remember that Japan was intending to invite President Xi Jinping in Japan last year. Now it was canceled because of the COVID, but that was the time that Japan tried to promote the cooperation over competition. When the Trump administration tried to pursue the strategic competition with China, at the same time, Japanese keyword in engaging China was cooperation. So there are kind of much more complexity in defining our policy towards China, and especially in utilizing of the Indo-Pacific debates. And there are lots of phases that we are going to navigate. And I think those navigating the policy, one of the principles we have is that try not to be vetoed by either by Washington or Beijing in the direction of the approaches that we are trying to pursue. So that was a very fortunate period of time in the later phase of the Abe administration that we have a very good status of the U.S.-Japan alliance. At the same time, there has been a significant improvement of our policy towards China. So those, the two kind of approaches were able to go in tandem. But at the same time, that many has mentioned that those kind of the dual track approach has been squeezed, especially by the United States have been more determined to pursue the strategic competition approaches. There has been a debate on the selective decoupling. There's no way that Japan is indifferent towards the investment and trade with China, regardless. Without regarding the United States kind of approaches, especially on the SDN entity approaches, how to deal with the emerging technologies, and that are all involved in the future direction of the investment. So that is, I think, where we are standing at on the U.S.-China competition. Sino-Russia, I think that was a very important question, and I think I think one of the strategic we do have a specific kind of agenda with Russia with regard to the northern territories and the political settlements over the issue. But strategically speaking, what Japan wished to achieve in approaching to Moscow is to diversify the Russian engagement in Asia beyond China. And one of the things the most thing we want to avoid is the China-Russian entanglement on every strategic issue they face in the Pacific. So at least that we can, induce Russia to have its own economic interest in Asia by investing in Japan, Korea, and else. And digging out kind of the Russia's special relation with Vietnam that might at least complicate the strategic calculus of China. So we're not having an illusion that China and Russia can be divided and that Russia can be the wedge towards China on that, together with Japan. At least that those are the approaches to be explored in the Japanese context. We don't know how much we are successful in that, but those are the basic thoughts that when we approach towards Moscow.
All right, I think that's a great way to put it. To prevent Russia from looking at every single Asia-Pacific issue through the lens of its partnership with China, and to sort of broaden the scope. I think that's a good way to put it. Gudrun, any thoughts from your side on Biden transatlantic, Sino-Russia?
I start with the Chinese-Russian relationship because it has been pretty stable for the last 30 years. On global issues, they do share, they have sort of a critical mass of viewpoints that they share. And they have come closer. And this is also, I think, owed to the fact that the last time a restart in US-Russia relations was tried was under Obama, and it failed. And so it sort of, the pattern repeats itself, that the US tries to restart and then it doesn't happen, and it draws China and Russia closer together. So I think it will be hard to kind of break it up with the present leaders in place in Russia and in China right now. And I think that the US-China question for the Europeans, this is a big, well, we don't have a solution yet. The talk about equidistance, I don't buy that. You know, it's not possible, as Eva said, not only because we don't have the sort of EU autonomy, but also because in terms of values and norms and standards, we're so much closer to the United States. And this is a very, very long-standing relationship. But I think at the moment where we are standing is that we try to work towards avoiding a certain scenario. And this scenario is a deepening of the US-China rivalry, where we in the end have two blocks, not only in terms of technology and, you know, broad economic decoupling, but also politically. I think there is no appetite for that in Europe, and there is also not much appetite for that in the region. And it doesn't only depend on what the US does, it also might depend on what China is doing. And I think, I mean, when you look at the last years, China has interpreted this Indo-Pacific concept from the beginning as an effort of containment. And it punishes India basically for, you know, falling into the lap of the United States, which is not the case at all. And Australia is handled in the same way. But we already see with India, China is making efforts. Maybe they have realized that they cannot fight at 5 different fronts at the same time. So this will also play a role. And you don't see that India leaves the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. You don't see India leaving BRICS. So they don't want to put their eggs all into one basket. And the same is true for Japan, South Korea, Australia, New Zealand, they signed RCEP. You didn't hear the big outcry in the United States when the European Union signed this CAI agreement, or the agreement on, in principle, to have an agreement. There was a big outcry because of the timing, and I understand that. But I think it is important for us to know what our interests are and what our priorities are. So I would talk more about EU sovereignty, and India is probably a good example for a country that practices strategic autonomy, but we are not in the same position. And yes, there is a big preparedness for restarting the transatlantic relationship. But I think there is also a deep concern, at least in my country, that 4 years from now, we will be stuck with a personality that is either Trump himself or somebody much like him, and then we're out in the cold again. And I think this is the reason why the focus is on diversifying partnerships and deepening other partnerships with countries that are like-minded in one sense of the word. And that's, not being treated as a sort of battlefield for the US-China rivalry to play out. Nobody wants that. not here and not in the Indo-Pacific. I mean, it might come to that point, but we're not there yet. And what we try to do now, from my understanding, is avoid this kind of scenario. We try to avoid the binary choice. We try to stand our ground, and we look for allies that come into the boat on these issues. And rules-based order is the interest of smaller and middle powers. If you are the superpower, you can afford not to stick by the rules, but for everybody else, this is bad. So this is, from my perspective, what the EU is also trying to do. But that doesn't mean you have equidistance to China and the US. We are clearly in one camp when it comes to ideology. The question is, can we avoid this new Cold War? I hate this expression, but can we avoid the world being divided into blocks again? Because that's not good for any of us. Sorry for being so long.
All right. No, thank you. Thank you very much for those points on equidistance, autonomy, and transatlantic, and the caveat on U.S. domestic politics. By the way, I think you're right when you say that the Sino-Russian ties are solid despite the existence of some differences. And I wonder whether Biden's sort of democracy versus autocracy frame does not just assume that fact and try to move on from that conversation. Fidel, any thoughts from your side on Biden and also the China-Russia thing, if you feel like pitching in on that too?
Yes. Thank you, Luis. On the new administration, I think Europe will be much more comfortable in the sense that they themselves are framing their relationship with China in very sophisticated terms. And Blinken himself has said that, China poses complex challenges that requires a complex relationship. That's what Ken was pointing at, and also Gudrun. So we have to live with this complexity, and we have to manage this complexity. It will not be, and we don't want it to be, a binary framework. So we have to at the same time, and we have to cooperate. And now we have, the Iran issue, and probably in a few months, North Korea will be in the agenda. So we need to work with China on non-proliferation, that's for sure. And on climate change, we have the summit in Glasgow in November. So we have to work with China on climate change, very important global issues. But at the same time, I think we will be closer to the US, and we will cooperate with the US in issues like connectivity, and also with Indo-Pacific partners. We will tend to do more practical things together in that area, I'm sure. And also on technology, I was saying before, on issues like the export control of double use technology. We'll have this conversation with the US, and it will be, not an easy conversation because not always interests align, but there will be much more disposition on the European side. There was much more confidence across the Atlantic to talk on these issues and to find common ground. On Russia, China, there is an issue there, which is this important part of Biden foreign policy, which is democracies versus autocracies. And this will tend to unite China and Russia in a defensive mode to prevent, the US and its partners and allies in Asia and Europe to give this bad example of democracy to their populations, and therefore they will be in a very, very defensive mode. And Russia, frankly, I think there is very little we can do to persuade Russia. But what we have to do is to see the signs of Russian wariness about being too close to and being the junior partner to a very big power, and therefore, if Russia, because it's in its interest, decided that it has to take some distance from China, then we will have to be there and to manage this situation. But for the time being, I think there's very little we can do to move Russia from its current position. Thank you, Luis.
All right, thanks, Fidel. It seems we've got some sort of consensus on the Sino-Russian question. That's good to know. That's good to hear. So we've got 7 minutes left. A bunch of questions from the public, I'm afraid. So I'm gonna have to be rather strict and remind you that you will have 1 minute and 27 seconds each for the final round before I hand it over to Mario for final remarks. So I'm gonna read all the questions. Just pick whichever one you want. We're gonna go now in the reverse order. So Fidel, Gudrun, Ken, and Eva, and then Mario. So just take whatever you want and do whatever you want with your final minute and a half. Here I go. So the first question, I guess, must be mainly for our European panelists. Leaving aside concerns about China's reaction, what other factors may prevent the publication of an EU outlook/strategy on the Indo-Pacific? Which other factors may hinder that? A second question, which I guess is specifically for Ken and relates to something you touched on already. Even if the Japanese government has provided financing for Japanese companies that would like to relocate out of China to other countries in the Indo-Pacific, there has been very little appetite from the companies. What is the role of corporate stakeholders in the Japanese Indo-Pacific strategy, and also on the current discussion of an EU Indo-Pacific concept, by the way, so also for our European experts. A third question, which I guess is for the whole panel, is Indo-Pacific strategies by EU member states underline the centrality of ASEAN in the region. How does that relate with the debate in the previous session about an ideological confrontation between liberal democracies and authoritarian countries? So very good question. Then one other question, how should the EU address the increasing projection of Chinese and Russian interests in Africa and Latin America? Should this prompt a more active role of the EU in both continents? And then finally, from Ambassador Fernando Alonso, for Gudrun and Fidel specifically, the economic relationship between EU member states and China they're very different, and they vary from one member state to another. There are countries like Germany that have achieved some sort of balanced relationship with China economically. There are others, particularly in the South, that has suffered in their economic relationship with China, and whose industrial sectors have been sort of the object of Chinese predatory activities, and who have a much more constructive relationship with the United States. So how is it possible to create a consensus, a European consensus on the Indo-Pacific, given the wide variety of perspectives? All right, so a minute and a half each. Fidel, Gudrun, Ken, Eva. Fidel, floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Luis. I will use my time in two questions. The first, what may hinder the Indo-Pacific strategy by the European Union? I think European divisions are, they exist, they are real, but I think we are little by little overcoming them, and I think it's a sign that in the last 17+1 summit, some of the European Union members were not represented at head of government level, and this is a sign also that I think that a common policy towards China and therefore to the Indo-Pacific, it's little by little coming by. This is linked with what Fernando has asked about the differences in economic relations between one country and the other. Well, yes, it's true but it hasn't prevented us from agreeing to this comprehensive investment agreement with China. There is, I guess, something in there for all of us, and we think there are opportunities there for all of us to pick up. So there is common ground that we can use. Thank you.
Thank you. Gudrun.
I pick up on the ASEAN centrality first, because this is exactly what I was talking about. I mean, who makes the decision who is a democracy and who is not? I mean, in the first session, we had this, you know, India's domestic development also not pointing in a direction of a liberal democracy at the moment. But this is exactly the point. If you look at the region as a whole, democracy and, you know, liberal international order is not the only game in town. Now, I don't think we can afford that we pick only countries that have the same political system. Like-mindedness has to be applied to different things. On non-proliferation, if you have only like-minded countries in the boat, you're lost, because, you know, you want the others to join on non-proliferation, on climate change, and how to do that. So I think there is no contradiction. And if you look at New Zealand and Australia, for example, they don't talk about the liberal international order exactly for that reason, because they know it's not shared in their neighborhood by everybody. On the EU-China economic relations, yes, Germany has a very special role here, but let's not forget that, for example, the car industry in Germany has suppliers in other European member states. And what we need really to look at is the dependency, the degree of dependency. This is a debate in Germany at the moment. First studies are coming out, you know, how to change the situation. It could be, of course, that Kai will, and the whole, the fact that China seems to recover from COVID so fast economically will draw us even more, suck us in, because our economic growth will depend on, you know, cooperating with China. So it's a very difficult situation, which we have to monitor very closely.
Thank you. Ken.
Well, thank you very much. I'd like to take up on the question on the Japanese, the business sector's role in the Indo-Pacific. And I would say for Japanese business community, Chinese market is too big to decouple. And I think a small amount of the subsidies to encourage Japanese firms to get out of the Chinese market is little, I think, effect in play. Japanese business sector will decide to go out of China whenever they find that business portfolio will have a rationality to do so, not through the strategic kind of encouragements that the Japanese government may wish to promote. So I think we are not ready to sacrifice the competitiveness over like a decoupling kind of notions. And we are not really encouraging like import substitute kind of effects by only to protect the domestic kind of big businesses over protecting the Chinese influence in the Japanese domestic market as well. So given that kind of, you know, the business community's basic notion, something that might emerge from our own kind of development is to our kind of consciousness on the SDGs and, you know, ESG kind of types of the business ethics and corporate responsibility behaviors that may also encourage the Japanese consumers and also those business evaluation and investors to keep their kind of consciousness eye on what kind of good investments to be prevailed for the Japanese business community. In that line, I think there will be a more standardized, the approaches will be made in how to deal with Chinese corporate behavior and the Chinese market as well. And I basically agree with, Gudrun's assessment on the ASEAN. I think ASEAN is the only neutral actor and can actually promote the rulemaking in the inclusive manner. So I think every kind of rulemaking has to go through ASEAN, not by overlooking the ASEAN's role.
Thank you, Ken. Eva, you've got just a few seconds.
Okay, for the sake of time, just the first one. I don't think that anything can hinder the publication of the EU's Indo-Pacific strategy at this stage. The question is how it would look like, how strong it will be, and how the EU will be capable of adapting it. I have no doubt that it will be quite consistent, that whether it's maritime security, connectivity, or trade, there are so many baggage, there are so many previous instruments that the EU can build on, so I'm not too worried about that. But we need to be aware that we cannot please everyone. So the question would be really how willing it will be also to answer some of the ideological questions that we have looked upon. Because, and here I can reassure everyone, from the years that everyone has been watching the EU putting together this Indo-Pacific strategy, it will be seen as a major test of the EU's capacity as a foreign and security policy actor by its partners, by the US, by Japan, and will come under close scrutiny. So we better stick to whatever we will publish.
All right. So on that note, we're going to wrap it up. Thank you all. I see there are other questions coming in. Unfortunately, we run out of time, so apologies if we couldn't address every single question. Handing over now to Mario for final remarks. But before doing that, I just wanted to thank all of our 4 speakers for their terrific contributions. It's been a pleasure, a very, very enjoyable discussion. Mario, cuando quieras.
Thank you so much, Luis. I'm aware that this has been a very long webinar. Some of you may have been over 3 hours and a half in front of the computer. So I will only take 1 more minute of your time. First, to thank the Embassy of Japan for its support. Also for thanking again all the speakers for the first and the previous session. I think it's been a very, very stimulating debate, and I mean, all the issues have been presented here today. I think are quite relevant and have been elaborated in a very stimulating way, as I said before. And also, the final thing that I would like to tell you is that to announce you that in the following 2 weeks, we will be publishing 3 papers on the issues that has been discussed today. I mean, they have been written by some of the speakers, and I hope that we will be continue the debate, after the publication of those reports. And thank you for all our audience for all the questions, and I hope to see you soon again. Okay, bye bye. Thank you.